Meeting to order. It's the March 28, 2013 Scituate Planning Board hearing. I need a motion on the agenda.
So moved.
Do I have a second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. The first item on the agenda is 214 Clap Road. It's a pre-application meeting. Just so that everybody is aware of it, I know everybody is, but just to make sure, this is really, it's not a formal application, it's an informal discussion with the board. So that they give a chance to kind of just overlay what they're looking to do, present to the board, and get comments from the board. The way it'll be done is that we will have the applicant make a presentation, we will then hear from the town planner, and then we'll open it up to the general public. Having said all that, introduce yourself, tell us what you'd like to do.
Good evening, my name is Deborah Keller with McKenzie Engineering. Here representing the applicant and owner is Joe and Dave Iron-Costa and Paul Bork of Fern Properties LLC. Just briefly, I wanted to let you know that both Joe and Dave have been in the construction business for over 25 years in the South Shore, and what they would like to do here is be all-inclusive in the sense that they would like to develop the property, build it, and sell it all within their company, rather than selling it to various builders so that you have several different people there. I think that's an important point to make for the development as a whole. As we go through briefly, it's just, again, the project is located at 214 Thomas Clap Road. It's an approximately 17.6 acre site with an existing single-family home up near frontage on Thomas Clap Road, with the remaining rear piece of property being undeveloped. There's approximately a little bit over 14 and a half acres of upland on the property, with approximately just shy of 3 acres of wetland resources identified. And first, again, as stated, you know, we're looking to file with the planning board and get their input this evening on a flexible open space development. And so initially what we need to do, and I'm just going to move this over so I can speak to this board, is to prepare a plan that conforms to the current zoning bylaw and subdivision rules and regulations. Therefore, we prepared a conventional density sketch plan showing a standard subdivision roadway, which is just shy of the dead-end requirement of 600 feet. The typical roadway section is shown up here in the corner, which is 12-foot travel lanes for 24 feet of pavement, 18-inch Cape Cod berm, associated grass shoulders with a 5-foot sidewalk coming up and around the cul-de-sac. I think those are briefly the main requirements for the roadway construction. If we go into looking at the zoning parameters, the property is zoned in the residence R1 zoning district, so the requirement for lot area is 40,000 square feet with 100 feet of frontage on straightaways with 60 feet along the cul-de-sac. So therefore, those parameters are met by this plan, and the lot area, again, is 40,000 square feet, exclusive of the wetland resources if, when resources are identified on each parcel. Again, we're complying with the front, rear, and side yard setbacks per the zoning bylaw. And then, so that I think we'll chat about a little bit more, but I think that's the basic overview of this layout, which could be built under the current regulations. What we would like to build is a flexible open space development under that bylaw, section of the bylaw, which allows for, number one, with regard to the roadway, an option to reduce the pavement width. We're proposing to reduce it down to 10-foot travel lanes, so we have 20 feet roadway width with the 18-foot Cape Cod berm, grass strips, and still providing a sidewalk through the development. Again, the road does conform to less than the 600-foot dead-end requirement. These lots we're keeping a minimum of 30,000 square feet of upland rather than the 40. So there's where we're looking for a reduction to sort of allow for the open space component of this development. One of the other things that we'd like to do is realign the road slightly so that we could maintain the existing home that's on the property currently. So we've aligned the road a little bit different than coming in straight into the site. This would allow, and I apologize, this plan came up with nine lots. So therefore, we're using that same criteria with a smaller development footprint or land impact for this, which allows us to provide what we call parcel D in the rear, which is an open space parcel, and it's approximately 8.9 acres, which is just slightly over 50% of the parcel area. For drainage, again, drainage is flows in the existing conditions now. There's sort of a ridge up in the northeasterly area so that the existing current runoff runs in a southwesterly direction across the site. So therefore, we have conceptually at this point designed two basins, one in the rear here to capture the upper, what I would call the upper portion of the development, and then a wet basin down near the entrance to collect the southern portion of the development. What I think is important to state for this flexible open space design, again, we're looking at it from a conceptual standpoint. So when we look at it for drainage, we've run an analysis to look at the peak rates of discharge. And at this point, with these basins as they're shown on this plan, we can meet that requirement. I think this open space parcel as well fits well into the surrounding properties, knowing that the northern portion, that can show you better, we have a nice overall ortho here. So this piece is what I'm talking about, so rotated a little bit different, but this is the rear piece that I'm talking about for open space. Is surrounded by town-owned property that's in conservation now that has some walking trails on it. So this would be a nice piece to add to that in a restricted conservation option. And from what I understand, there's trails that are close in vicinity that could be linked to that piece as well. Access to these pieces, and I believe there's some town-owned property just across. This is Bates Lane here. So access could come up into this area through Bates Lane, as well as the town owns a strip along here which comes off Thomas Clapp Road up and into that conservation area as well. Sorry about that, thank you. We did have, just to let everybody know, we did try to introduce ourselves to the neighborhood. Last Saturday we had somewhat of a little neighborhood get together to try to present the plan and show the neighborhood what we were looking to do, and that we were going to meet with you this evening as well, and hear some of their concerns, so that if we have an opportunity within the development, that we can take that into consideration as we move forward with what we'd like to build here. I think that's a good basic overview.
It's your overview, so if you're satisfied, we're satisfied.
I know I probably forgot something, but it'll come to me later.
Well, I'm sure there's going to be a lot of questions coming.
Sure.
Laura?
This is a really kind of special piece of property in a number of ways. It's all within an area of priority habitat that's designated by the Natural Heritage Program. That's Habitat for Rare and Endangered Species. So that's a situation that, we haven't had, I think, in any of the other plans that we've dealt with recently. There are a number of vernal pools, either on the property or just off the property, and those provide habitat for, certain, amphibians, and then they provide, food for other wildlife and so on. Another feature of this property that's fairly unique is that right now there is a lot of stormwater that flows across the property and then across Clap Road, which is not such a good thing for traffic and for traffic safety. And it goes across the road into the South Swamp, which is the headwaters of the surface water supply. There is an older home on the property, which is another, characteristic that I think we've had from time to time. And then finally, it's adjacent to the Bates Lane, what I would call the Bates Lane Preserve, the large area of, hundreds of acres of open space that the town has bought over the past, couple of decades. So those are all some unique characteristics. I think one of the positive things about this plan is that there is a certain amount of open space which could potentially be given to the town for more walking trails and more access to some of this beautiful natural area that's adjacent to the Bates Lane Preserve. I had a number of comments, first of all, on the plan in general, and then having to do with the conventional density plan. As far as the plan in general, because it's in this priority habitat and about, an area of over 2 acres would have to be cleared, it's going to have to be reviewed by MIPA, which is kind of a big deal. And presumably it will get through that review and, but it's not really clear at this point how, what the end result of that review is gonna be, if it's gonna, affect the plan in some way or not. So, my recommendation would be, as far as they're filing the plan, that they do that process first, that they get through that MIPA review. I have to say, I don't know how long that will take, but just given that it could, influence the plan somewhat. Then there's some concern that we've heard from the neighborhood, and also when you go out and look at the site, it is on a curve. The concern is with traffic coming out at this location. There's some cedar trees right at the where the entrance would be that look like they would really block visibility pretty significantly. And if those have to come down, then there has to be a scenic road filing. But I think, this may be one where you want some traffic review just because of the curve. 9 homes is more than, what you usually have seen, with a couple of exceptions. So, I think that might be something beneficial. I know the planning board with other plans has been really interested in seeing the pedestrian access to connect with, the access through the open space. So I'm sure they'll bring that up, and I won't have to talk about that. And then with the stormwater going across the road, even though it's gonna be piped under the road now instead of going over the road, I think that's the general idea. Although it has to still be talked about with the DPW. I think that there really has to be an easement on the other side for where that stormwater goes. It's going onto someone's private property, even though, there was stormwater going in that direction before. There's never really been an easement there to make sure that, that's acceptable to that person. As far as the conventional density sketch plan, I had some concerns about that. When you look at the way the lots are configured, to get the 40,000 square feet into the lots, there are these like slivers, I guess you could call them, that go up to the northeast corner of the property. And they're there for each of the lots. It has some area up there. It seems a little, well, I think it's unorthodox, and it really doesn't seem like it's really in the spirit of the zoning bylaw. There were a couple of other issues with that conventional density plan also. There was a settlement plan that was part of an agreement between the Conservation Commission and the developer, and that came from a court case involving a dispute over what areas of wetlands were gonna be, designated. And that plan has drainage that's similar to what's on the conventional density plan, but it's different from what's on the conventional, the overall sketch plan that sets the density. So I think the plan that sets the density, that's supposed to go by all the bylaws, should also follow what came out of that court case. I mentioned about the slivers, or, rat tails, whatever you wanna call them. There's another, I know rat tails is kind of, a little bit of a
I think it's an appropriate term.
unfortunate kind of phrase, but a couple of
Can't diss the
other,
rats.
That's all these, right?
yeah, all of those. A couple of other issues with that plan. One of the things the planning board has looked at in the past is whether the drainage is really, realistic in terms of what's gonna be needed for, for the property, since that has to be on its own lot. It can't really be on the same lot as one of the homes. And when you look at the drainage parcel on the conventional density plan, there's no grading shown, there's no access shown around it. So it's a little hard to, really quite get your mind around how that would work for the drainage. It's also, when you look at the, we overlaid the flexible open space plan over the conventional density plan, and when you do that, the drainage that's proposed for, the actual working drainage is quite a bit larger and kind of chews into some of the lots, significantly. So I think that's just something that the board should think about. I'm not, certainly trying to steer you one way or the other, but I think that's, just something to really think about, how you want to set the density here and how you want to make sure that it's realistic. And then finally, there's a measurement called the lot width. That's something that's required under zoning, and it has to be 175 feet in this zoning district, which is a pretty significant distance. It's supposed to be measured parallel to the road. Most of these lots are around a cul-de-sac, but when you look at the way that lot width is measured, it just doesn't seem to have any relationship to the road. I think you would think that you would probably go off of a tangent to the cul-de-sac, and these are kind of just, however they fit. They fit the 175 in there, but it doesn't seem to have any relationship to the road geometry at all. So I think those are all some things that really need to be looked at with that conventional density plan. Those are my main comments. I think there is some real potential benefit to the town through this plan, but, I think the density maybe needs to be, looked at pretty closely.
Super, thank you.
May I address a couple of
Sure.
Laura's comments? I think the first one that I'd like to, because I looked at it after Laura was kind enough to let me know some of her concerns. I think the primary lot that looks like it doesn't align up correctly is lot 4. You can see that here it is slightly skewed. I think the interpretation of that regulation is that in the statement under that lot width requirement, it adds a statement that says, or as close to parallel to lot frontage as practicable on irregular shaped lots. So I think that's where that interpretation came from. But with that discussion with Laura, I said, well, let me look to see if, we can, put that a little bit more parallel to the frontage. As I went through, most of these are right on. I know that when I looked at lot 7, I said, oh my God, that needs to be rotated too. But when I bring that line up, it is tangent to the frontage on that lot. So the one that I looked at in specific was to make sure that we could accommodate that rotation on lot 4. And I have a plan, but I'm sure you don't want to see it now. But I can make that, address that concern with the plan and still maintain the required 40,000 square feet. One of the things that I'd like to state too as well is that, you know, we focused on the drainage, looking at the drainage on the conceptual plan, because this is obviously the plan that we'd like to build. Although the density plan is one that we need to ensure that we could build, looking at the area provided in these spaces, even though they look, you know, and are in different shapes, there's actually more square footage here than there is on this, the conceptual plan. I'm probably misspeaking on conceptual conventional. I calced out on the density plan that we have approximately 73,300 square feet within these 3 drainage parcels, whereas over here between these, actually, and even counting this small area, which we don't technically need on that area, we had 67,000 square feet. So there is a reduction in the area. So the ability to provide adequate drainage, we felt as though we had enough information to feel comfortable with that on the density plan. Speaking of the settlement agreement, one of the things that, obviously when we were moving forward and having discussions earlier on with the commission, we wanted to focus on the plan that we wanted to build. So the sketch that goes along with that settlement agreement shows this alignment rather than going straight through. But the intent of this settlement agreement, as I understand it, is that we wanted to make sure that at this entrance to the development that we provided adequate flood storage when it comes to the concern of how the existing drainage flows through that portion of the site. And as Laura said, there are some flooding concerns at that entrance, and we'd like to try to incorporate that into the design. But you can still do that same intent with this layout, and you know, I think that I would defer to the attorneys who wrote the settlement to see whether that interpretation still complies with that. But under our understanding from the applicant's attorney who worked on that settlement agreement, that this doesn't have to be identical to this layout, that this still could comply to that settlement, or the agreement starts over again for this layout. And I think from, just briefly on the natural heritage comment, we obviously are working with natural heritage. We've spoken to them. Obviously, we don't want to finalize that work with them and then and come and meet with you. So as we're moving forward subsequently with all of the agencies we need to meet with. And so we met with natural heritage, and it's the box turtle habitat that's in this area. I'm sure you know it's a large habitat area. And we do have a verbal okay for the conceptual layout. They're comfortable with it as it is. And we will meet the requirements. We would need to file for a conservation management permit through their agency. So, but again, we're going to try to do that concurrently as we move forward through the design, so that we're all looking at the same plan as we move forward.
Okay, thank you.
Hopefully that helps.
I guess just more comments. I echo Laura's concerns. I know that the road on that turn, there's not much, I mean, at some point you're going to need access, so there's not a lot of leeway there for entering into the site. Exactly, yeah. I do think on the conceptual flexible open space, I'm really happy that you've saved that structure. Mm-hmm. That's a really important, I think, for the board, to preserving some of the existing structures there. The density, I think, is maybe a little bit of a concern for me right now. Also, as Laura kind of alluded to, the open space and the benefits for that. She was kind enough to share some of the comments from the affected abutters, as well as people that are around there. And I think a couple people mentioned that, just a walking trail around the retention pond is not necessarily, the best benefit. Now, obviously, there's the parcel of, the parcel to the left that would be adjacent to the Bates properties. So that's really positive. So that's a very good aspect. But I think some other public benefits, and I was just looking, like, for instance, right now, the sidewalk is, if I read this correctly, is on the right-hand side, going on the right side and then around the cul-de-sac. But yet the retention pond, at least conceptually now, would be behind lot number 2, well, actually lot number 3. And then you've got a proposed walking trail, but there's really no access from that sidewalk to the walking trail that I see. And I mean, we've seen a number of developments like this where, the proposal is to have a walking trail around a retention pond, and it's just not, in my mind, not the best public benefit. I mean, we certainly, I think, as a board, want it to be marked in a better way, maybe have access, again, from the sidewalk in some respect. So that's just something also to think about and be aware of. And then the lot layout for the conceptual plan, again, to me, it just looks like it's quite dense because of the 9 lots. And I mean, that was just my first perception. I know that you're going off of what you can build based on the traditional density. So it just seemed like those lots were actually, or the houses themselves were quite close together. Actually, what is like let's say on the proposal, between, let's say, lot number 5 and lot number 6,
Yes.
the 2 proposed dwelling areas, like what roughly is the distance between those 2 homes?
It's probably about 35 feet.
Yeah, it's less than 50.
2 15s plus a bit.
60 scale, yeah. So I'll just do this. So you're looking at about 40 feet between the 2 structures?
Okay. Yeah, so those were my sort of, I think, just the density of it is a little bit of a concern for me. But again, I want to stress the positives are obviously the land, the contiguous land that would go in as part of the, with the Bates property. And obviously, the whole idea of this flexible open space is to have a benefit to the town or the individuals that live there. And so I think we'd want to see a strong hand or some particular benefit that would, not just be for the residents there, but for the town as well. And those are my main comments.
I think, I apologize for not expanding that, but that was really the walking trail just going around the basin would ultimately continue. And I think our goal was that would continue and link up to the existing trails that are on the current town-owned property now. I didn't show it because we didn't really know where that would go at this point, but I think that was our intent was to link that in.
And you would intend to build the trail?
To what current they have out there now, which is so you're not going to.
Through the property?
Through the property, yeah, that could be something that would be coordinated.
Dan?
Well, these flexible open space developments can be great. They offer a lot of opportunities to get some open space and be creative with placement of buildings and everything. So there are some good things that can come out of it. And certainly the open space at the back is a great benefit to the town to get that and add it to all the rest of the open space property back there. I think my 3 concerns, my first concern is the conventional plan. I mean, I'm not buying the conventional plan at all, and we have to make a finding about what the density is allowed under the conventional, and the strips adding to the back of it, I don't think at all meet the intent or the requirements of that. So my guess is that you're probably at least 1 house too dense. If you drafted this, the way we typically see it. I don't know what kind of square footage you have in those strips, but it looks like quite a bit. So I wouldn't support, allowing that to happen and allowing that density based on those strips being added to all those lots. The drainage also on the conventional plan, I can see you've got like drainage parcel B, looks like it's right in the vernal pool and the wetlands areas and things like that.
No.
If you look at parcel B,
Parcel B here, down near the entrance.
Oh, maybe I'm wrong. Well, the wetlands flags are right there, so it's within,
Well, we're outside the 50-foot buffer to the wetland.
but you're within the 100-foot?
You'd be within the 100-foot. That's typically where, when you're in
Okay.
a low area, you'd have to put it, but we are staying out of that 50-foot no
Okay.
disturb.
All right, well,
Yeah,
maybe
where are
that's,
the vernal pools? Up near the hatchet?
There is an identified vernal pool on the property within this wetland resource here. All the other vernal pools were identified off-site. Some are identified here. And those, I think we had a little bit better location on. There's 4 or 5 that surround the property in the rear on the town-owned property, as well as, I think through here where this flows through and has a tiny pond, and there's another cross culvert here going in the southerly direction. There are a few here that were identified on the natural heritage map.
okay. Well, I think some of the issues Laura raised about the conventional, I mean, I'm concerned about that, and we've got to have that justified so we can make a finding about the density, but, based on the plan, at least on the square footage of the lots, I don't see how you can get that many houses on the conventional. So that's my first concern. I guess the other concerns really are drainage and then kind of the safety of this entrance onto Clap Road. It's a very busy road, and it's hard to tell just looking at a plan layout of this. If you look at, I'm thinking of like the Arrowwood development, if you know that one that's kind of up Clap Road, just a little bit further. That has sort of a nice broad opening to it because it's cleared of trees, and I think they have a drainage parcel down there. But for this type of development, that's nice to see if you can get that. You've got such a narrow spot here. I'm concerned about that when you funnel all that traffic down to there and you don't have any visibility on either end. So I'm not sure what your options are there, but I definitely am concerned about that being sort of a blind spot a little bit.
Well, I think when we move through the more formal
Yeah.
filing, we would definitely look at that, because obviously, from a development standpoint, we want your entrance to
Yeah.
development being a traffic concern.
So that one, just from a traffic safety concern, and then the drainage obviously is a huge issue, but of course, we'll get into that more as we go through the process. So
Sure.
that's gotta be obviously solved to our satisfaction and see the stormwater management plan and have that, very vetted, because since there's already issues there, we have to be sure that it's handled the appropriate way, so.
And I would give credit to the owners and applicants that are willing to really try to do the best that they can to address those existing concerns as well as we move forward with the development.
Okay.
Robert?
Laura, I recall in your comments, one of them was that this configuration on the conventional density plan with the long, thin strips was not illegal under our present zoning bylaws. Is that
I'm not sure about
correct
that,
into
Bob.
your,
Well,
Knowledge.
we don't have a lot shape factor, but, if you,
Some
I'm
discretion,
not
I
sure
think.
You
how.
have to meet the
If
spirit
there's-
and intent of it,
Address
Bob,
that,
so
yeah.
it may not be
That's-
spelled out, but if you don't
okay.
meet the spirit of intent, you can't just be creative and do whatever you want. That goes for any laws in the zoning bylaws, so
Yeah.
it would be open to some interpretation, obviously.
good, because where I was headed was if there is a space to crawl through to allow something like this, we ought to close it.
Yeah, exactly.
So,
It
wants to be
does
the farmer's
not
wife.
clarify that in any
Right.
way other than through where the house structure is. So that, I think
Right.
that's where we felt as though if you do interpret what's written in that section of the bylaw.
There's a lot of case law on things exactly like this, so, and it is spirit and intent and things like that, so it's not, crystal clear, so.
yeah, and there may be other times when this kind of a configuration is used for other reasons as well, as we've seen, to gain access to a street that's sewered or has water in it, so that the house lot is provided with that otherwise might not be, things like that. So it's a good thing to be looking at. I guess I generally agree with the comments. It does look denser than the rest of this area. Certainly 40,000 square foot lots are pretty typical, and most of the lots in this area are quite a bit larger than that. So I think it might be a little out of place, a little stiff. A couple of specific questions. The grading that's proposed or that you've been thinking of, is that going to have, involve clear cutting that whole area that we see in light green?
No, actually, my background is drainage, so I get really into it sometimes. But what I like to do when I look at the drainage from my first go-through is what is the maximum extent? So that I make sure that these basins are designed with the most conservative aspect to them, and that we can, I'd rather work that way rather than going in the other direction, going, the basin's too small, now I gotta make it bigger. So this is sort of my limit that I'm saying would be the maximum extent clearing, but ideally, when we go and get some more detail into the grading on these lots, we
There'll
would
be
like to.
places that you can
places
save.
where we could save trees, we would like to do that.
Yeah, I'd like to see that. I'd like to see the cutting that is done kept away from the lot perimeter a little bit more in certain areas, if that's possible. What about drainage for the roofs of the homes? Do you have local on-site infiltration for that in mind, or is that going to just become part of the overall?
Well, right now, conceptually, I didn't take that into consideration, but as we move forward into the final design, if that's something that we feel would be an appropriate low-impact development option, we'd look into that. Again, there are
You've
drainage.
accounted for the roof area in the total flow, though.
Yes, absolutely,
Right.
right now, yeah, absolutely, and I would do that even in the final design of those basins, even if we did put roof drainage in,
Right.
just to be, again, on the conservative side and looking into that. But, you know, I think one of the things that we have to think about here too is that we do have drainage issues. We do not have wonderful Cape Cod sand out here.
Permeable soil?
So, to get a lot of recharge, will,
Mhm. Worth looking at.
yes, absolutely.
I mean, as much water as you can capture at its source or as near its source, obviously, that's a benefit. The last thing I noticed is that one of the relief aspects of the conceptual site plan that you're asking for is a reduction in rear yard setback from 30 feet to 15 feet. And as I looked at this plan, I asked myself why. It looks like there's one possible situation on Lot 7 that might need such a reduction, but a little bit different house design or a little bit different house orientation would cure that. And so I wouldn't be tempted to give you that relief, even though we might be giving you many other kinds of relief, just on general principles. It's not, I don't think it's going to be required, and I think it sets a bad precedent. That's
I
about
think
it.
our focus was, I don't know if there's a little asterisk there, but it was more to set that for interior, lots that had interior rear lines versus we looked at the exterior and said we want to keep, you know, a decent buffer along that.
Mhm.
So I think we were trying to maintain that 30-foot buffer along any of the lots that had exterior property lines. So really the focus would have been on these lots on this side,
Mhm.
where you maybe have an opportunity to do a 15-foot setback.
Okay, thank you.
I saw Lisa here a minute ago. We're gonna go a little bit beyond into her time in terms of CPC, but I'm sure she'll be agreeable to that. Steve?
Yeah, well, I generally agree with the comments that are made here. I think that, you know, our first priority is to make sure that the conventional plan is flushed out enough that we can be comfortable that whatever the density is, that it could be built that way. So I think Dan's right that we need to make sure that gets flushed out. What I heard was that this drainage approach on the front end needs to be part of that over there as the initial as the conventional plan.
Our understanding through the attorneys who developed that settlement is that is not the case. That basically there's no specific language in the settlement that says that the entrance has to be in that orientation. We need to look at making sure that we provide compensatory flood storage for the low-lying areas in that area. So if we move the road, we increase the amount of filling that we do in that area, we would have to compensate for that.
Okay, well, I guess we'll leave that to the
Yeah, I think
lawyers
we-
to sort through.
Yeah,
okay?
I would defer
But-
to
but
them
that's-
too as well.
I guess that's my point, is let's sort out the
Sure.
conventional plan, make sure it's done to the degree it needs to be, I guess. And I do think that the intent to try to get to this flexible open space plan is a really good intent, and trying to free up additional property that can be contiguous with existing conservation land is a great idea. And, you know, one of my questions is, what do you plan to do with that? Are you trying to transfer, are you trying to get a conservation restriction on that land? How is that proposed to be addressed?
I'm not sure that we've really thought that fully through, but I think that, correct me if I'm wrong, shout at me, hit me if I say something wrong, but I'm sure the applicant would consider putting that in, donate, how would you?
Excuse
sorry.
me, I'm Joe Lyons Austin, I'm the
Hi,
applicant,
Joe.
and
Uh-huh.
as we proceed with this, and as Deb had mentioned, concurrently, we'll be speaking to the Turtle Bank, and we want to find out their requirements as far as what's acceptable, whether we deal with the Maxwell people or the town, as far as what's acceptable to them to place either the property in a restriction or it gets deeded over. So we'd be working with them to
Mhm.
find out what's acceptable to them in order to transfer that through and then present that to the board.
And the town will be in on that conversation?
Definitely,
Okay.
we would run that concurrently with the application.
Okay. I guess that brings me to my other question is, in terms of priority habitat, have they really mapped it out yet? Do you know where it is? And would it affect the conventional plan?
From my understanding, we sub-consulted with a gentleman, Dan Wells, who's from Hyla Ecological, who does these habitats and
Mhm.
coordinates with natural heritage. And a discussion that I had with him is that there shouldn't be any difference between natural heritage, whether or not you have, again, you know, this type of layout versus that one with regard to what stays undeveloped on the property. So that would, he felt as though either plan would be reasonable and would still
Okay.
follow along what we've discussed with natural heritage so far.
So both of these have been discussed with
Mhm.
natural heritage? Okay, that'll be part of your MISA permit
Right,
process and all that.
that's right, yes.
Have you filed an ENF yet?
No, because we still
wanna get this
wanna make
first,
sure
okay.
we know what we're gonna be planning.
I guess the only other question is, I think the comment about traffic is definitely one that it sounds like you'll address as you get into the more detailed planning here. How are you addressing the drainage under the road? How's that being done?
One of the things that we started informally discussing, it was sort of preliminary when we were discussing the settlement agreement, was on options on how we might be able to work with DPW, and there is a existing 12-inch culvert here at our frontage. So one of the things that we discussed during that process was working with the town to either upgrade that or repair it. It's quite an old pipe. And so those would be some options that we have to make that situation better. I did make a call over to DPW, and I'm hoping to have a meeting with them soon, but, you know, again, kind of trying to do all these things concurrent so that we're not
Mhm.
working off of different plans
Okay.
and basis.
Okay. I think we've covered most of my questions on it. I would say if you can get to that place where you can work this flexible plan, I would be much in favor of trying to preserve some open space here if it's possible, so. One other question, in terms of the total, roadway surface, is it more here or over there?
There's more road here. It's a 24-foot travel lane
I mean,
versus
total
10.
total including the driveways and all that? Just in terms of impervious surface, I
Yeah,
guess.
there's more in the conventional density. You have a sidewalk, the road is basically the same length, I think it's about 3 feet difference between the two.
Mhm.
I think your driveways are probably similar, maybe possibly
These
even a
are
little
longer here.
shorter. Or you've got a few shorter ones on that plan than you do over here. I mean,
Okay. But you'll
Right.
address that as well.
I could get that number for us,
Mhm.
yeah.
Okay.
I guess let me chip on. I think some good comments, and I think you need to take them to heart here, but let me, unless I'm told otherwise, my expectation is that the agreed-upon drainage configuration is what I would expect to see in both the definitive, in the definitive to come back and figure what the density is for the flexible. So I'd expect to see that. Traffic, I expect to see a traffic study on it. And that's not necessarily or pretty much the flexible rather than the definitive. I mean, it's gonna be the same thing. I think I'm very concerned over the density. I think that, I'm not sure in my mind that you're gonna be able to get that many houses on that piece of property. Particularly if I come back up and I overlay, and I didn't do it, but I saw what the result would be. If I overlaid what you proposed under the original detention basin up above, right up in the corner, and if I put that in, it's gotta be at its own lot. And I think that takes some area, and I definitely don't approve of the rat tails. I think that it's in your face in terms of figuring out what the area is, because I think there's a fair amount of area that's coming in those. In terms of the lot width, the 175 foot, you said if, as near as it could be within the configuration of the lot. But I think if you're designing the lot, you can make it look right.
And I think that I went
Okay.
through that after discussing with Laura,
Yeah.
and I think
Mhm.
we can make that work.
Okay. I'm also concerned about the clearing. I spent some time on a much smaller scale looking at it. I'm concerned about how much the clearing is going to be, and I'm also concerned as to what the fill areas are going to be. Significantly so. What I'd like to be able to do, if that's agreeable, is either walk through a piece of property with you guys, if that's, and maybe some member of the board wants to go. If we could do that, that I think would be worthwhile, at least for this member of the board. In terms of the habitat, I think we need to come back up and resolve that in terms of what needs to be done with some sort of, a letter from them with their expectations on it. I would suggest that you look at Elm Street. It's Tilden Estates off Elm Street. Look at the conditions that were put on that, because that has a very similar situation where you're coming back up, you're putting in a subdivision with a cul-de-sac flexible, and it is adjacent to an area where there are going to be trails. And if you look at that, I think it provides for a location for parking that distinguishes where the trails are, and it basically integrates them into the subdivision that allows you to have access into that piece of property. I think you're spot on adding it. I think from a flexible open space, I think that piece of property adds to what we currently have, but it adds value to it when you have really access to it. Because that's one of the things that we've been looking at, is how do we reasonably provide access into the land that we bought and the land that the town owns, and this would be another opportunity to provide that. So I think, let me go through. So agreement, we've talked about, the wet basin by the road, we've talked about that. I think that should be there. I think the drainage across, over, under, or around the road's got to be addressed, and that should be addressed for the definitive, so we can understand what the impact of that is. That's probably at least 95% of my shopping list. So anything else on the board before?
If we go for a site walk, you gotta be careful, though. Remember the last time?
Yeah, but I didn't sue them.
Yeah,
They're gonna need an insurance certificate from you.
No, I took a header.
the Tilden Estates too, when we went through that one, we did spend a lot of time on the site, actually like flagging some of the trees and things and looking at, what are good for buffers with neighbors and identifying that and trying to, make it as nice for everybody as possible.
Yeah.
So that was a very helpful process.
I wasn't referring necessarily to that whole process, because I think this is farther away from the neighbors, but what I was really concerned about was the access where we identified the trail and how the trails are gonna be.
Yeah.
Because saying that I have access to trails and not providing the access to the trails, I think is important.
This one seems like it has some good opportunities for access from off-site,
Yep.
maybe a way to enhance it, coming off of, to the left, the existing trails, maybe somehow connecting it, or, you've got access from Bates Lane on the one side, and you've got access further down Clap on the other
Yep.
side, and that to me seems like a much more logical access than trying to get through the neighborhood into that, because there's gonna be no parking, and, we did that at the Tilden Estates, we provided for that, but, how many people are gonna drive down there and park in the street and find their way back there? But this one has some good opportunities to connect to the existing open space, and maybe there's a way to, work with, Maxwell Trust or someone and see if you could create some access points or maybe even some improvements to tie it in somehow. I mean, it's pretty close. You can see where it's right on the corner of it, so there may be a way to continue that trail along the edge of it or something
Yeah.
and tie it in.
I would say,
Yeah.
I think there is, from my understanding, is there is a trail that meanders through here so that we could take it off and kind of link that.
If that's what they want, they may
Sure.
not want to do that, and
Sure.
you don't want to get too close to the vernal pools, but I
Right.
think that would be a good conversation to have, and I know there's the study that was being done by, the Conway School? Are you aware of that?
I'm not, no.
Actually, Lisa's here, Lisa's involved in that a little bit, weren't you, on the, You should get in touch with them, though, but there's I don't know a lot about it, but there's a college that's doing sort of a design charrette on this whole area and what to do with the open space and long-term planning and all that, so it'd be nice to see that tied into their plan somehow, and they may say, we want this to be left alone and just part of the open space, but it may be something where they see an opportunity for tying it in.
One of the things Conway School could provide you was the basis of their feedback from that they had a public meeting, that what were the people expecting to see the area that is surrounding this piece. So that may be worthwhile to know when you're looking to do it. Because what you're gonna end up doing, you're looking for a special permit, and it's gonna take, 4 out of the 5 members of the board to vote for it. But it's based on what's the relative benefit to the town. So it's all 550.5, so that may be something that can help with your, when you acknowledge what the contribution's going to be.
but
Or
you
you
have to
present-
sort of, you should have that conversation with the MESA people too, about access, because they'll have their own ideas about access too.
Who's the right person to talk to about the Conway study, is that?
That would be sponsored, conservation.
The commission, the Conservation Commission has care and custody of that property, and we asked the Conway School to study it, so it could be, I think, through
The Concom?
the Concom, and could get them tied in with the, we'll have a report shortly from the Conway School. We can certainly take a look.
Great.
Right?
That'd really enhance your application to tie it into that work they're doing.
That puts us well beyond our time. Can you give us about 5 minutes more, Lisa? Okay, so let me, having gotten 5 minutes, I'll open it up to the public for comments or observations that they have, recognizing that it's not an application, it's a preliminary discussion.
Yeah.
Go for it. Tell us who you are and where you live.
Yeah, John Nyland, 232 Clap Road. If I may, I'll just, use some of the wood material. This is my house right here, okay? I wrote a letter to you, Mr. Wimbacher,
Yep.
and I trust you
Yep.
got that and shared it with the members. And I think it articulated a lot of concerns that I have, as well as a lot of the other neighbors. The main concern I have with this layout, I think I agree and share the board's concern about the density that's being projected here as being, probably far too many houses, for this small parcel. The main concern I have is, the size of this detention pond that's located right here, and, although in one of the other plans, I don't see it here, they do show a culvert of some sort, going over and tying in. There is also an overflow discharge here, which would then, bring whatever stormwater flow you have coming out of this parcel down, in this area. I can tell you right now, traditionally, we've lived in this house for 20 years, we built the house. Every storm event we get a river that comes down, this portion of the parcel, and it floods the front portion of my property. So, although, this pond has the potential to hold up that water and perhaps even maybe reduce that, based on their calculations, I also foresee that, you know, a 25-year storm event, or perhaps even a 100-year storm event, which, you know, seems to happen every 5 years, you know, has the potential to, you know, to send quite a bit of water over here and, you know, coming down my property. The second concern I have is if you look at the elevations that they have here, they have the top elevation shown at 124. The elevation of my property right here is 110. It goes from 110 feet down to about 108 feet here, and, you know, it generally slopes, you know, in that direction. You know, so you're looking, I'll be looking at something that's, you know, 14 to 16 feet above the existing grade. That grade gradually, it sort of slopes up here, and as, you know, she pointed out earlier, you know, it peaks out, you know, in this area here. So in looking at this, what they're talking about is a 124-foot grade in this whole area. I don't see any way that they can achieve that without clear cutting. They're gonna have to provide all that fill in order to get that grade to slope into this direction, provide the stormwater in that pond, and treat that, so.
No.
Okay?
Yeah, I think that was genesis of my comment before in terms of
Yeah,
cutting.
yeah, I just wanna make sure
No.
that we're, you know, clear on that. I could probably think of a couple other comments, but given the time constraint, I'll
Yeah.
leave it at that.
Yeah, no, I apologize for chewing up all the time here, but I think we've given some good input. But let me go back to 2 points that I'd make. One is the availability to be able to walk through the property. I don't know if you'd check that and let us know whether that could be done.
I think Laura was kind enough to offer that as an option, and I think we spoke about it, and I think that's, more than happy to have you out there.
Okay, the other thing I'm gonna suggest to you is that, if you'd like, we can come back up and continue this to another time point, or when you're prepared to come in and have a pre-discussion before the application, if you wanted to do that, I'd offer that out. I mean, you don't need to tell me now, you can think about it.
Yep.
Right. But that would give a chance for more discussion in terms of public hearing, but it'd also give you a chance to digest the comments that you've got from this board and be able to come back up and put it on it. Sir?
Ask one quick question. My name's Dan Reynolds. I live at 21 Bates Lane, so I'm a direct abutter behind what I think is lot 7. On that aerial view there, my house is in outline, but it's an older photograph, so the house isn't there. I just wanted you guys to know that there are neighbors who are directly behind one of the lots that will be built, and we'd be looking at each other's windows from there. So talking about like tree buffers and stuff like that, I'd appreciate. Also, I don't know if you've done any soil samples back there in that area, but my whole lot is clay, and I'm having a really hard time with water drainage during regular rainstorms. It's puddling up in my yard. My yard's to grade. It slopes down to Bates Lane, and I have puddles in my yard constantly. So you might want to check out how you're going to deal with that thick amount of clay.
Okay.
We have done some extensive soil testing on the site, and I would agree with there is, you know, it's not
clay.
sand, but I don't believe that we found any clay on this portion of the site.
Mostly
Take the
clay.
trees out, it's different, you know.
Yeah, it's probably mostly Essex
Hard,
soils.
hard-packed glacial
It was a sea soil, so yeah.
Okay, so,
I'll be-
okay,
I'll be
last
so fast.
last one.
Shan Morrissey, thanks a lot. 238 Clap Road. I just want to point out one thing that wasn't mentioned tonight. This vernal pool right here, this is the 125-foot buffer, and my understanding from Laura is that we're pretty clear on no disturb within 125, but talking about the amount of clearing and filling that's gonna have to go in, the 250-foot buffer is,
It runs through the houses and into the driveway.
here's the 250-foot buffer.
No doubt.
That's our, you know, we
Sure.
talk about it, we don't strictly enforce that, but this is the 250-foot buffer. And I would have concerns about the clearing and filling in terms of what that's gonna do to species
Yeah.
that live there.
Good. Okay,
And I think when we move through conservation, we're gonna be obviously talking about those buffers as well.
okay, so I think, let me, go ahead, Steve.
I just had one question that just popped in my head here. What's your sequencing on sort of filing and all that? Because you've got to go to MIPA and all of that, so.
Sure, what we'd like to do is, when we get a consensus from the board as to, you know, how we can move forward with a final submission, finish the plans, and at that point, we'd be moving forward with Natural Heritage. And then formally file with the planning board as well as with the commission concurrently, so that we're all on the same page.
Okay.
I don't wanna expand the process and go through with the planning board and then go to the commission and have the commission have concerns too, and then have to come back again.
Yeah, but you gotta go to the state level too, so there's,
Yes,
there's,
yes.
could be an iteration there, that's all I'm thinking about.
Okay, so I think you got a fair amount of feedback.
Thank you very much.
to that. So you've got that, then I think it's your decision if you want to come in and have another preliminary before you do the filing, which I would probably recommend. It's your call, and then the availability to walk through the property, if you give us determination, then that's not.
I think we can, if you give us a date, we can,
Okay, we'll look to do that. We'll work through Laura on that.
sure, absolutely.
Okay.
If we could set a date now, then everybody in the room will know when to come back if they're interested.
I think he was talking about the date for the walkthrough.
Oh, the
Walkthrough.
walkthrough, oh, I'm sorry, I thought you meant the date
No,
for the next.
no, the walkthrough.
Okay.
I mean, you could, if you know now how much time you need, you could schedule for one of our upcoming hearings to come back, if you have an idea of how much time you need. We've got,
Well, that's why we're trying to see if they can figure it out now.
we have
and then
2 meetings in
I
April.
think we'll
100 letters.
have to digest a lot of the comments that we
Yeah, I
have,
think,
and
yeah,
think we'll
and
probably
then
send
come
it
back
out.
and we can push on.
Okay,
thank you.
thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you very
Thanks.
much.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Bill, question. Would you assume that these blue lines are trails? Couldn't figure it out either. It seems,
I verified, he was in the back, Karen.
I don't think they're streams. Mr. Stoll.
I'm doing well, thank you. Yeah, that's good today. I feel like death won't go. That's,
Springfield representing a client like last year, they had them.
yeah, I think I heard all the
They all
discussion,
had,
so.
you know, on table in screens that were this big. And they had
The only thing I kept thinking of is
Overhead.
gerrymandering is a time-honored Massachusetts tradition.
everybody, like the whole wall.
Exactly. I mean, it's so archaic that we don't even have a projection.
And everyone at their table, nobody had
If they
anything.
came to that, and that was the only thing
When
they
they put it up,
you know,
everything
they would
was
accept.
scanned. Stuff Laura gives us. It's okay now.
Is that our call or the zoning board of appeals call?
How wonderful.
Well, I think
Well,
there's
maybe
enough
once we get our new
discretion
town
in it.
hall.
that-
overlap.
That we could make the
I
judgment.
did see the paper today.
Okay, so we look at the demolition bylaw.
Anyway, I saw the article today on the EDC proposal, and it was very good, so I like it. That's all I was gonna say.
Here's the downside of writing with a felt tip pen.
The group was here for what we just did, but there's a number of.
Yeah, I've had that happen a time or two.
For the Form As, I guess we have a couple Form As.
Well, maybe
It reminds me,
I don't know if the CPC was being
you know, we
public. I can't-
hold,
people might
you've
be
been in
interested in that.
depositions before, so you know that everybody is, you know, very, very cagey about their notes and they hide them away and so forth. I did this one time and this guy's busy writing away, you know, as fast as he can
Their
go.
presentation advice.
We get all done, we break for lunch, and he's leaving his pad out for everybody in the whole world to see. We're thinking, what's going on? We walk over, he's writing in Chinese script.
Oh, my God.
It was Monday, then they had to reschedule the last minute. It got pushed to Tuesday, so it wound up just being me, which is fine.
Okay. Well, if that happens again, don't hesitate to like shoot me an email. I mean, if I can.
It was all
That was very last minute.
filmed on camera. There had to be
We could have had
a
some.
dozen lawyers in it.
But I did see that they did approve.
And you,
They approved everything.
Yeah.
well, in the case that I was talking about the Chinese script, it was the plaintiffs were all Chinese, they're all
Yeah.
from Hong Kong. And Asians are just panic-stricken about the American judicial system, or legal system.
What if the,
And they literally had this handbook that was published by some sort of business group in Hong Kong about how to deal with American lawsuits.
for the meals
And
tax?
you get into the part where they're talking about discovery.
The other, I guess, what if
And
both?
there's this cartoon there of this guy with a headsman's axe in the mask or the hood and stuff, and they said, it's a deposition, not an execution.
Argument, you can pass both of them, that's fine.
Yep.
One passes the meals
That was
tax,
an
the other
interesting
one also
case.
passes the meals tax, plus creates a stabilization fund and directs where the
I've been in a
money's
few,
going.
never 8 hours, but a few.
Because if you pass the
Yeah, I was done at the end of the.
Oh, it's so physically demanding to be there, and
I see what you're saying, yeah.
you know, and the guys
It just was a little
confusing.
Yeah,
or
I think it's not gonna be as,
and the guys that do it well will, you know, the first 4 hours is just filler. You know, it's the zingers come at the end of the day.
the two didn't really conflict.
I can see what you're saying now, but at first that,
Mediation
We're now back
process
in
is
business.
sort of the same
Lisa,
thing.
thank you for your extra time. We were,
My pleasure, thanks for inviting me.
the floor is yours. I think what we talked about would be is if you kind of give us an overview of CPC, the changes that have come up, which I think are significant this year, roughly the amount of money that we've got, maybe the process and some of the projects that we've approved.
Great, good. So,
3 minutes.
hi, everyone, hi, all of you, yeah. I'll talk as quickly as I can. My name's Lisa Fenton, and I'm currently the chair of Community Preservation Committee. I was a liaison to the committee while I was on the advisory committee for 6 years, so I've become familiar with the projects and the process throughout the ACT's history here in Scituate. So, just to give you a little bit of background, the Scituate adopted Community Preservation Act back in 2002. Since then, we have had a 3% surcharge on our property taxes, and that has resulted in approximately $1 million of surcharge, of Scituate surcharge each year, and it's been matched by the state from as much as 100% match in the early years to about 25%. We are a little bit more than that because we are at 3%, so we go through 3 different rounds of matches, so that usually gives us an additional 3 to 4% each year. So I think our minimum is about a 28% match.
And it's based on how many communities in the program now.
That's right. So in the beginning, in 2002, there weren't very many, so we were able to spread the wealth over just a few towns. The more towns who participate in community preservation, obviously the money is distributed over more towns. Which leads us to one of the parts of the new legislation, but I'll get to that in just a moment. So we have up till this last year, 2013, Scituate has had a total of about $8,650,000 with a match from the state of almost, $5,651,000. So that has come from the state. So it's a pretty good investment with regard to the match that the state gives us each year, whether it's 28 or certainly more. So we've had a little over $14 million worth of revenue since the beginning. Originally, Community Preservation Act was the legislation was built in order to protect open space. There are 3, and now there originally were 3 categories, and now there are 4 categories that we fund and protect under community preservation. They are open space acquisition. They are that includes now recreation, so that's the 4th. So open space and recreation are still part of a category. Affordable housing or community housing, and historical preservation. And each year we do a good amount with open space and a good amount with historical preservation. We have not done a lot with affordable housing, which is one of the areas that we'd really like to tackle this coming year, and we've started that process as of February. So open space, we've done a great deal of when the act first came in 2002, we've done a wonderful progression of open space acquisition and preservation, resulting in some of the property that you saw in this last presentation up in the west end. I think we're up to almost about 330 acres, perhaps, as well as additional acreage spread over town. Of course, most of the acreage exists up in the west end, but there are lots of other areas that are protected and acquired with community preservation funds based on habitat protection, water resource protection, and sometimes just to keep property open for the public and not to be developed. So the legislation that has changed this year resulted from the fact that a lot of towns, especially the towns who have been involved in community preservation since 2002, we've acquired quite a bit of our open space, and the more open space you acquire, the less there is to be acquired. So some of the towns such as Somerville and Cambridge, there's not a lot of open space left. So there's been a lot of talk through the years about, well, we need recreational opportunities, but in the past you could not restore a ball field or a playground unless you had purchased the property with community preservation funds. And so there was a debate going on for quite a few years. Well, you know, must we adhere to that? There's so much that we could do with open space, passive recreation, and other forms of recreation if we could restore and rehabilitate existing property that was under recreational domain. So this past year, that legislation was finally changed, which has really been wonderful. As you know, in Scituate, there's always been a need for more ball fields and more playgrounds and more opportunities for passive as well as active recreation. So this is the first year that we have been able to use the funds to restore a playground, add to our playing fields. One of our projects this year is a pretty substantial lighting operation with funds matched by a private foundation as well. But that in itself, to be able to take fields and light them up at night, is almost like, you know, acquiring 2 or 3 extra ball fields given the amount of playing time that will be increased. So projects like that were not available to us in the past, and they are. So we went fairly heavy this year on recreation projects based on that legislation. The other piece of legislation that changed was how the trust is funded. In the past, the Community Preservation Act is funded exclusively with recording fees whenever there's a real estate transaction. A certain percentage of the fee goes into a trust, and then that trust builds throughout the course of the year, and it's distributed to the towns based on the percentage of surcharge that they participate in, as well as how many towns participate. This year, they voted for a $25 million addition to that trust based on years where there is a budget surplus for the state. And people, you know, kind of grin and say, well, when are you going to see a budget surplus? But the reality is there's been one for the last 8 years. So that money, it would have to be voted each year and lobbied for. It is voted for this year. So based on whether or not there is a budget surplus, the trust will acquire an additional $25 million. So we've just received our match for fiscal year 2014, and again, it will be very similar to last year's, which was 25%, plus we'll go through 2 more rounds, so that'll be an additional 3 to 4%, and then we'll see if we do get the $25 million for this year, an additional boost. We'll learn of that in August as well. So it's for Massachusetts, the act has been seen as an incredibly positive attribute. As we all know, there is no line items in most municipalities for this type of community preservation that we do, whether it be historic, whether it be to acquire land, whether it be to put trails in, whether it be to rebuild a playground or restore town archives. That money is usually based on really healthy years when we've got additional funds in our town budgets in order to invest in some of these more niche operations. Community preservation allows us to do the types of things that towns don't ordinarily do, unless there's some sort of excess funding. We rely very heavily on property taxes in this town, very few commercial taxes in our town, one of the lowest commercial tax towns in all of Massachusetts. So right now, community preservation is really one of the only areas where we do have money to spend on community improvements. And we've been really fortunate to do that. This process has been a really well proven process, such that we on the board, there are 9 of us, we accept applications. The applications have pretty strict rules with regard to what you can apply for. So we have the 4 categories: open space, historical, community housing, and now recreation. And in each one of those 4 categories, there are pretty explicit rules to follow. There's it's very structured, and it all has to do with this chart. This is our allowable or eligibility chart, allowable uses chart, and it involves the 4 categories and the definitions, which are very clearly spelled out with regard to acquisition, creation, preservation, support, and rehabilitation and restoration. So when we look at an application, we make sure that first of all it fits in one of these 4 categories, and then that it's got to support each one of these categories in one way or another. And if it doesn't, then it's not eligible and we don't look at it. So we go through a filtering process. We look at all the applications. We see first of all if they're eligible or not. We take the eligible piles and then we go through them a little bit at a time. And based on what our priorities are as a group with regard to how much we want to spend, what the priorities are in the town, what the priorities are coming down from with regard to some of the other needs that we have, whether it be water resources, whether it be open space protection. We had a real passionate need for the seawall restoration. So we had funded a seawall project, and again, we can't just fund seawalls just for the sake of funding a seawall, but what you can do is restore and rehabilitate a piece of real property that protects a historical building. So the property that is bordered around the lighthouse, that is deemed eligible for community preservation funds because that seawall then protects this historic building. So uses like that come up quite often, and in these cases, especially cases like this of the emergencies that we're under, it's really nice for us to be able to help in that regard. But again, we do follow really strict rules with regard to what's eligible, and we then rate the applications based on that, as well as how we feel the project actually meets a lot of the other goals that the town has and that we have as a committee. So the projects, some of the projects that we have this year, again, we've concentrated mostly on recreation based on the changes in legislation and the needs that we've had with ball fields. The Recreation Department did a really nice job with involving the community in this. It wasn't just the Recreation Department writing applications. They held at least 2 public meetings where they invited anybody to come in with ideas, and they involved the different types of sporting leagues that aren't part of recreation. They involved the biking community, they involved the passive recreation Maxwell Trust people, the seniors, some of the other groups. Public meeting, everybody just brainstormed about potential ideas for recreation in town. They listed them all, they helped prioritize the list, and then they came out with about 15 projects. And then they culled it down with regard to priority and how, first of all, the need for certain of the needs for the biggest populations as well as the most diverse locations around town. So they didn't concentrate on any one given area. So with that, they came down to 3 recreation projects that the rec department put forward. And one is this, the athletic complex at the high school right here that I talked about, which is lighting the fields. The Reedy Foundation had already donated almost $200,000. They needed that matched, a little more than matched, with a $360,000 request for us in order to put up lights that would light all of the fields back there, which really will add to the amount of time that those fields can be used by not just the high school, but by lots of different of the community teams, as well as some of the groups from out of town that come and compete against our teams. The Central Park fields, there's some restoration that needs to be done on the property there, as well as an outbuilding that will be built for protection and to house some of the maintenance equipment and the other team equipment and materials. And their other application is to improve 3 different basketball courts in different places around town. One is in Hummerock, which is a place that we've never done any work before in community preservation. And then we've got 2 of the schools that have pretty old and crumbling basketball courts. So they did a really nice job in trying to spread those out around town to different populations, but big populations, so that large volumes of people from the community could be using these newly improved fields. We also have some multi-use trails that coincide with some of the Grand Loop and the sidewalk studies that we've been working on throughout the years. We have about 6 historical society applications that are continuing repairs on the Little Red Schoolhouse, Lawson Tower, gravestone restoration, and lighthouse journals. We have an application in for our town archives, which is required by the state, and I think that's it. The seawall I mentioned. And then our most controversial one is storm windows for the Union Mission Chapel in the West End. So they're all very diverse, but all very community-oriented applications that we have this year.
Could I ask you a question about the first one, which was the lighting of the fields?
Mm-hmm.
In your process, do you have to have somebody commit to the operating costs for that? Ongoing operating costs?
That's a really interesting question. So you're talking about, for instance, just the electricity.
Yeah, and the maintenance of the lights and all of that, yeah.
That was discussed with the original Reedy Foundation group, and that will be a part of the ongoing funds that from the rec department. We have a one-shot deal with regard to, in this case, our application. It will begin and end with what they have requested from us, and then the operating costs will be a function of the rec department continuing fundraising.
But they made the commitment that they would pay for the operating costs.
Yes, the maintenance costs and operating costs are all part of their proposal.
Thank you.
Other questions? It's a pretty rigorous process, I think. Frank's been through it, I've been through it. I think I've done it for a fair number of years.
After the first 3 or 4, they run together, but it's, as a group and watching how CPC's operated, it basically started out, developed a structure, and basically enhanced that structure so that when a project comes in, it's pretty well vetted before it gets a chance to be voted on. And I think each project is assigned a liaison from CPC that works with the group that's on it and basically reports and makes a recommendation to, as well as the applicant coming in themselves. So
It's a nice process. So we vet it, and then once we vet it, we acquire all that we need to with regard to funding information, document it, and then of course it goes into the warrant and gets voted on by the community before anything is ever, accepted. And we've had a really good rate of success with that. There's certainly a lot of nice things to be able to vote on when it comes to community preservation, because it is something, again, that everybody can take advantage of. And again, it allows us to do the types of projects that there is no other money to do. So it's a really wonderful opportunity that we have in order to maintain and to grow our town in some of these nice ways.
And there's a monitoring process so that if so much was allocated and it wasn't spent, then that money is returned back to the general fund or the part of the general fund that's dedicated, say, to housing or to whatever, or to recreation. That money would be returned to go back into that area again. So the projects are not only approved, but they're monitored in terms of their spending goals.
I was gonna say, I think it's super important, something like CPC, to have funds earmarked for something like that, that can't be touched, for other things for the town, especially, you know, with the tough economic times that we've had, you know, over the past, I don't know, 5 years, some people say 30 years. But if you don't have funds set aside like that, they tend to get raided for other things and just disappear.
They absolutely do, and that's kind of what we've been running into, Dan, so it's nice that you mentioned that. But given that this is one of the only, you know, available funds that is replenished each year by not just, you know, our surcharge, but by the state, it does become, you know, like a lightning rod. If somebody has a project that they want to do, our own DPW, in this case seawalls, the gates restoration, you know, it's the only money in town. So we do have to be very careful to make sure that we're following, you know, the rules of the act. But what we're finding is that because we have no other revenue source, if you will, for the town, that it really is the one area that people look for in order to fund projects, which is too bad, because the only reason we generate revenue is because it's a surcharge plus it's being matched by the state. So what we would love to see is some opportunity for a process like this to begin that has a fund that could be used exclusively for projects that could generate revenue. And that's what we would feel we would be very fortunate to have running, much like a community preservation committee runs, but some sort of an economic development stabilization fund that could do similar things in order to generate revenue. Clearly we need it. You know, seawalls are not going to repair themselves, and, you know, buildings are certainly not going to build themselves. So it's a wonderful test case.
Yeah, and I think when you earmark things like that, you're sort of guaranteeing it's gonna happen for the town long-term, and if you don't, it just doesn't, and it hasn't. So I think it's super important to prioritize as a town. These things are important to us, like we did with the CPC, and say this is, you know, a long-term plan for the town.
Yeah.
The other thing I was gonna mention too, are you sort of in the planning process right now with the CPC plan? Because that was one of the things we wanted to talk about, is kind of coordinating a little bit with the planning board and the master plan and all of that.
Right. Well, right now, we've been creating our plan based on our internal conversations and some that we have certainly had with some of the other town boards. I found much more collaboration in the last year or two with other town boards than we've had in the past. For instance, DPW has been really, I think, proactive about the growth of these multi-use trails. They're consolidating into what we referred to back in 2003 as the Grand Loop, which provides these wonderful non-motorized transit opportunities from destination to destination. We're incorporating historical sites in with them. This is one of the projects is this historic bike trail project. It's a website, so you come up, so you get this wonderful old sepia map. We've got Matt Brown to do our illustrations, and Katina Bentley, who's working on our website. You come up to this map of Scituate, you see different trails, you get to click on one of the trails, and it brings you to a link. You can download the map, and then each one of the historic sites is noted on it. You can either take your bicycle or take a walk around here. And then you can click on another link and you get Matt Brown actually telling you a little story about what happened. The point is that...
Is this gonna become a smartphone app so you can take your phone with you as you go?
You got it.
Okay.
This little site will have one of those little barcode-y things.
They can't text and ride, no, yeah.
Well, you can do it and walk, yeah.
The reason I bring
Bump
this
into
up
a
is
tree.
that the departments and the projects are becoming now much more collaborative. So this works in with Historical Society, with the DPW, with our scenic road signs. I mean, so many things are coming together now so that a lot of our a lot of our boards and collective goals are actually starting to work together, which is quite nice. So you asked about sort of a plan going forward, and we're trying to work collaboratively with other boards. We'd love to have a chat with planning board based on what your goals are and to see how we can fit in with that. But again, I mentioned the community housing piece has been very important to us. We've allocated money to our category of community housing, but other than funding our affordable housing trust, we have really done very, very little in that area, and that is something that is, near and dear to me. So we're trying to work on that right now as well. And we just had a really productive meeting a couple of weeks ago with a woman from the Massachusetts Affordable Housing Alliance came down and met with us, Community Preservation. We invited folks from the Affordable Housing Trust as well as our Housing Authority. And we had a three-way conversation and made a couple of priorities with regard to where we could start and what we would need to do. And CPC funds can actually fund a coordinator that has a very clear description of skill sets who would actually help execute this. We've always talked about doing it, but given that we're all on volunteer boards, it's a wonderful thing to talk about, but actually to have somebody put their nose to the grindstone and do it has been a real problem for us. So we're getting those groups together now, we're forming a plan, and we're gonna, it sounds like we've already identified, the area to start with, and I think that'll be happening shortly.
That's great. Well, I know we've spoken a lot over the past several years. This board is really focused on economic development and a lot of those opportunities. And while you can't target CPC money towards that, you can get things that serve multi-purposes, things like, the trails you're talking about, the positioning of the beginning or the end near businesses or things like that. There's some things that, can kill two birds with one stone types of things. And I think that more of those conversations, would really help a lot of different departments and a lot of different goals. So it's exciting. I know there's a whole category of, they call it recreational economic development. You bring in trail systems, you advertise it, Scituate's friendly for bikers or walkers or hikers, and you bring more races into town and things like that, and you coordinate it with the businesses. And once you build that reputation as a town, it can really enhance the business climate.
Absolutely. So part of the PR for this is these maps going into some of the different stops on the train station, so that people can take the train into town, not their car, get off at one of the train stations, hop on one of these trails, stop off and spend their money, go to the beach, and then go away. And
that's right.
They don't need a parking space.
When they're broke, go home.
Yeah.
It'd be nice to see like bike rentals at the end of the train stop.
Absolutely. We got the bike rentals going. We've got kayak rentals going. Yeah, we got it all. It's all part of the process.
Make sure they stop downtown and spend some money and then get back on the train and go home. Yeah.
And our next meeting, we ended up that we got two applicants for the RFP for the open space study?
Right.
So that's gonna be funded in part by CPC.
That's great. I think it's great what you're doing. So it's a great asset to the town having this, and the results, are visible over the years. And, a lot of this stuff wouldn't happen, and there's a lot of lost opportunities that, we would have lost had it not been for the CPC, the open space, like you said.
Well,
it's not going to be around forever.
It's the best buy you can get for your money when you're figuring, if it's going to get matched by the state. It's pretty hard to turn that down.
It is, and in long term, it does enhance property values around town. When you've got a community that has a lot of open space and recreation, it does go to the bottom line in terms of, increasing home values and things like that. So there is an economic benefit to it as well.
Absolutely.
I'd certainly
it's on
rather
the cover
live
of Smithsonian Magazine this month.
Really?
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah, have a look.
Awesome.
It's really neat. They rated the top at least 20 small towns, they call them small towns, and the attributes that they gave them, I'm like, oh, wow, Scituate could have been one. And maybe it will be.
Well, we'll work on that.
Well, and it's obviously something that came up at town meeting last time as well, that people really love this and they want to support it too. And that was really validating to see that people wanted to continue having the funds earmarked for that.
Well,
so that's really important.
It always happens. I know people say, geez, well, we could be using that 3%, tax for something else. You could, and it's true. I mean, you can always pay operating costs with it, and, you can take it back but for everybody to pay a little bit and use it collectively and then have it matched for these, you know, major projects that really do beautify and protect it and preserve the town, it's a pretty hard deal to turn down.
It is, and I think it's really long-term planning versus short-term thinking. You know, when you have something like this, you say, as a town, this is what we want to see long-term. We're going to invest in open space and recreation and things like that. Whereas if you don't have it earmarked, every year there's a new need for money.
Right.
Every year, something comes up. There's always some crisis, or something needs fixing, or somebody needs a raise or something.
Salt and sand. You
It
know,
is.
it's
Every
always-
year there's something, and if the money's not earmarked, it's not gonna be there.
Right.
So I think it's a super important program, and I think, you know, I plan on living here the rest of my life, and, you know, I think everyone's, you know, you'll see the benefits 1 year from now, 5 years, 10 years down the road, and I think it's just super valuable.
Two quick questions, if I may. Can you give us an update on the North Scituate train station canopy? Because I saw that they, you know, that was CPC funds for, what was it, a year ago, I think, or 2 years ago?
Even two.
And so I noticed they took the tiles off, and I think they're gonna be moving it. So if you could give us an update. And then, do you have an update also on the bridge on the walking trail over the Herring River, so that you could be able to walk all the way out to the North River? Because that was a proposal too at some point.
It was a feasibility study to do that. And, you know, Frank can give us a little more detail on that, but.
On the train station, we're making bumps out.
Okay.
It's in the process.
It's like flows downhill?
It's a little tricky, but the tiles were saved. Does anybody want to touch on that just a little bit? What,
Yes, I'm responsible for that. I'm the vice chair of the.
We travel in
Historical
strange
Commission
circles.
With our application. There were two things that held it up, but most importantly was the weather. And we are now, as of today, I let another contract just a few hours ago that's going to allow us to complete the project in very short orders, if the weather permitting. So the tiles have been taken down, they're being stored at the DPW, and the ironwork is too. The town gets to sell the ironwork once there are elements that are going back to the site on town property. And our interest in the commission was to not only preserve the canopy, but to preserve the station, which is privately owned, and permit the owner access to the back of the station, which was blocked, which was a bad piece of planning 100 years ago. In fact, the canopy probably was 100 years old in 2012, last year. So we've had lots of hurdles to jump over, not the least of which was the estimates that came in from the general contractors after the engineers designed the project were much higher than anticipated, and so Al Banger appointed me the general contractor, and I've been managing and the contracts and then piecemeal. And we're gonna come in on budget or under budget, I predict at this point. And we've let all the demolition contracts and many of the contracts, individual contractors are lined up for the reinstallation, which is the other half of what you see there beside the canopy will be installed. It's in storage, as I said, and the tile roof put back. And we hope to get lighting in it and some plaques and so forth that guide you around North Scituate and direct you around North Scituate. There's several potential historic districts, and a lot of buildings still extend from that period. So, and older. So it's coming along. I think by summer we should be having a rededication.
Excellent. Thank you.
With regard to the bridge, there's actually a few bridges that are out there. There's supposed to be a couple of crossings when they call it the Russo mitigation for the MBTA. There's a marsh that was reestablished in back of like South Sherrado. And there's a couple of places, inlets and outlets, so that salt water can come in. And it was a reconstruction of salt marsh.
Right there by the riverway, right?
Yeah, and so there's two small crossings that are supposed to be done, and that's something that the commission will do. I think we have some funding for that. We may need a little bit more. Those are fairly simple and just something that the commission hasn't got to with other projects that were going on. Unfortunately, the Herringbrook crossing has become more political, which is a shame.
It's something that I very strongly supported. We got money to do some feasibility, and I believe the selectmen had kind of put the brakes on that a little bit. There was some thought that possibly it tied into the Herringbrook subdivision, which who knows where that is. But we hope at some point to come back to that, because it's a wonderful piece of property.
Yeah.
The railroad bed is really inaccessible to most residents of the town of Scituate. The reason we're doing the Conway School piece up the west end is to make sure that all the property that we acquired is available to the residents of the town of Scituate. We think that's really important. Talking about how important the CPC funds are. If people use their hard-earned tax money to buy that and then can't enjoy it, there's not much sense. So that's our goal as a commission, Conservation Commission, and eventually we'll circle around that bridge and get back to it. I can, as long as I have a shot at it.
Lisa, I had a question about the affordable housing piece that obviously has not been addressed very well in Scituate and has always been sort of an issue. And in terms of the money, so if you don't use money each year, isn't it roughly a third for historic, open space and is that how it's supposed to be allocated, or?
10% for
10%.
categories.
Okay. And if it's not used, does it get reserved each year, or does it go into the
Yes,
housing
so-
trust, or?
No reserve.
So the 10% stays in the reserve for that category.
Okay,
So we do have some reserve. We actually had quite a bit in reserve in affordable housing. And then 2 years in a row, we transferred, we voted to have $700,000 put into a trust. So we had at least I think a minimum of $1.4 million that we put into the trust, Affordable Housing Trust, where it still is.
Okay.
And, the reason for doing that was so that they wouldn't have to go to town meeting whenever they wanted to
right,
to acquire a piece of property or to renovate a piece of property. So the hopes was that that would be a much more efficient process. But, for one reason or another, and for the most part, I think it's that there's not, elbow grease to put to some of these projects when we're
Right.
relying on volunteer boards. So we're hoping to address that.
yeah, and that was one of the things I was gonna raise. Scituate, I think, is roughly maybe 4 or 5%, the 10% 40B threshold. We're very low and have made really no substantial progress on it for years and years. And I have some experience with other towns doing projects like that or being involved in those, and it tends to be towns that get up to that 10% do it in big chunks.
Mhm.
It's very hard to get to those levels or have a significant impact on affordable housing doing, a couple units here and a couple units there. And a lot of times it's sort of through a public-private type of partnership type of thing. There's been some preliminary conversations about, larger scale developments in some areas of town that are very preliminary talking about that. But I wonder if we could explore using some of that money, to enhance, a private project, mixed-use development with affordable housing.
Here to talk.
The one that I really like are the artist lofts, which also ties into economic development. Those are great projects. They have so many benefits. You make them affordable. They have either a foundry or artist space in it. You help with the affordable housing, but also it has a great indirect benefit into the town in terms of when you have artists living in the community, art appears everywhere. It makes the community more desirable. It
Yeah,
raises
Shelley
property
Goring
values. It's
spoke about those. They're very inexpensive, but they're, that's what we need around here. And the other thing is that rentals, rentals are huge, and each one of those counts as well.
yeah.
And in a community like ours, and she was very surprised to hear this, is, I'm sure you all know, people really want to be able to rent a home, but you can rent anything throughout the winter, but come summertime, boy, you're out of here for a couple of months. And she said, wow, that's a very interesting thing. Well, come to find out that CPC funds can be used in some cases, certain limited amounts to buy down somebody's rental, for a limited amount of time. So let's say somebody, whatever, or an option to rent to buy, those types of things. So there are a lot of options that we could be looking at that Housing Authority, it may not be under their purview, or, Affordable Housing Trust, it might not fit what they want. But within the three groups, you might be able to work something out so that it's actually viable for what the biggest need is in town, which in our case is rentals. You know, you've got a lot of people who wanna work in the town, teachers, you know, children of people who have grown up here all of their lives, who are just looking for affordable rentals. And we've got them, but only in the winter months, so it's something that we could tackle.
Well, I think that's the way to go. I mean, you talk about there's not the elbow grease to get these done, you know, if you can partner up with a private developer, because the issue with the private developers, of course, is the bottom line, and it's hard to get affordable units in because it affects your bottom line. But if you have some help from something like CPC, makes it a lot more viable to do those larger projects and maybe really make an impact. Instead of doing a couple units here and there, you can do, you know, 30, 40 unit project as part of a mixed-use development or something.
But CPC can pay the difference between the market rate and an affordable unit.
Yeah, see,
So
that's
in other
great. I
words,
didn't know that. That's great.
At no loss to the developer.
Right.
He's getting a market rate unit. The only difference is that he's getting it from two funds, one would be CPC as well as the affordable component.
You know, recently I was made aware that there was some sort of a trade show, I guess, in Boston, where they were talking about affordable housing in terms of extremely small apartment kinds of.
Micro.
Yeah.
Micro apartments. Yeah.
And you know, one of the things we've talked about is the idea that there's no place for our children to live. And that the only thing that seems to make a lot of sense is to go up in terms of density. And perhaps these kinds of microstructures would be attractive for young couples or young people in a you know, sort of a, I'm thinking kind of like a way station from, you know, graduate from high school, started living your life, have a place to live for a couple of years while you save some money, so the day comes when you can make that down payment.
Absolutely, and that's what we're lacking right now.
Anyway, I thank you for your patience in letting us extend into your earlier
Very
time.
good.
Yeah,
I was
fantastic.
pulled out of the windmill meeting
I'm ready
over
to
at
do accessory
advisory, so I
dwellings
gotta
in my
run
house,
back
so I have a
there
place for
now,
my
but
kids to live, yeah.
that'll probably still be going on.
You're a regular Don Quixote.
Anyway, thank you for that.
Thanks,
Thank
Lisa.
you all, thanks
Thank you.
for inviting me.
Okay. We're not quite on schedule, but the next item is demolition.
And I want to see your smartphone application on that, too.
All right,
So
all
I get-
right, we're getting there.
I didn't realize you brought the whole commission with you.
Yeah, sorry. They can point them out or they can.
I'm kidding, you know.
Historical Commission, okay.
Affordable housing to do it at this scale, you gotta find a piece of property that's affordable to do it with. You know,
Eminent domain.
yeah, it's pretty hard to do if you're doing it as a private.
I understand, but that's the, you
Good
know, we need
evening,
a community redevelopment agency is what we need.
Chairman. If it would be helpful, I think I'll just spend 5 or so minutes explaining, and then you guys can ask questions that you have. Does that work for you?
However you want to spend your time. it's up to
Great,
you.
thank you. The Historical Commission is bringing forth a demolition review bylaw. Before I begin, I just want to introduce my fellow commissioners, Arthur Beal, who's the vice chairman of the commission, Betty Meisner, Reed Oslin, and Steve Litchfield, who are with me tonight. The commission is interested in bringing forth a demolition review bylaw at town meeting. The goal is simply to protect historic resources in Scituate, significant historic resources. And I'd like to just present the planning board with the reasoning for bringing this forward and answer any questions you may have. For the past 4 or 5 years, the Historical Commission has been working on an inventory of historical assets in the town. I think I had Karen forward that to you. It was a very lengthy document, but it's about inventory of about 900 different historical buildings. It was identified mainly through the restoration of the Greenbush Rail, and then through, interestingly, CPC money, we did historical surveys. And the results of that are these, which are called Form Bs. And they're all different, and I just brought some samples along for you to look at. And what the Form Bs are is essentially research, and each one of these is different, is research that's done on a property. It takes a little bit of the guesswork out of what makes something old and what makes something historic. So the level of detail you can see in the back discusses how that information was obtained. And all of these have been filed with the Massachusetts Historical Commission, and they're available online. You can go from the website, the town website, or the Mass Historical website. The next step for us was to determine what's most important.
Fortunately, many of the really significant historical buildings are owned by either the town or the Scituate Historical Society, but there are many others that are offered no protections at all. They're very much a part of the character of Scituate, and our hope is to promote the public welfare with some of these historical structures. The bylaw that we're proposing, it's not a new concept. There's over 120 communities, cities and towns in Massachusetts that have such a bylaw, including Marshfield, Norwell, Hingham, Hanover, and Duxbury. Situates, I think we've taken a little bit of extra step with it. We included something we feel is unique, which is an economic hardship provision. If the building owner was facing some sort of economic hardship, that would weigh into our decision. We eliminated properties that were in the FEMA firm velocity zones, and that was at the recommendation of the building inspector, who's taken a look at this bylaw and made about 7 revisions. The hope is that we could, buildings that were slated for demolition, some could be preserved, alternatives could be found. As you read the intent of the bylaw, it doesn't prevent the demolition of a building if that in the end is the owner's intent. We're hoping to find some alternatives, whether it's convincing the owner not to demolish it, moving the structure, or I'll give you an example in a few minutes of something we did with owner in the north end, in the north part of Scituate. Before a building is scheduled to be demolished, a public hearing would be held if it was considered historically significant. It's important to note that all buildings that would be reviewed that are over 100 years old would not necessarily get this preferably preserved status. As a matter of fact, that would be more rare than common. The hope is that we could make some alternative to the demolition and work with the owner to do so. Finally, there's many strategies that we could take place, but the commission feels that this is the least restrictive but most comprehensive approach. The reality is that we're going to lose historic homes going forward to, fires, floods, demolitions. They're just going to be lost through neglect. So we can't prevent everything from being demolished. But in the end, this bylaw is a speed bump. It will protect some homes. And like it or not, we live in one of the oldest and most historic communities in Massachusetts. And we can't protect everything historic, but right now we can't protect anything. That's our discussion, and I'm happy to answer any questions you have.
Questions from the board? Richard?
I didn't really have any questions. I mean, when we brought this up earlier, I thought it was a really good idea. So, I mean, it seems very reasonable to me, and, I support it in the intent of it as well. I know that you were maybe concerned with some of the restrictions, but.
Yeah, it's more questions about it, so I certainly support it, and I've dealt with these in other towns before, and it is fairly common, and it's a very useful tool. I think that the concern is if it becomes too restrictive, sort of the unintended consequences of things.
Sure.
Like alteration becomes seen as a demolition or something that's minor like that, and I didn't have time to comb through all the language and compare to other towns, and I understand you guys did that, so.
So for an example, what is considered a demolition, it's a complete demolition of the building, and that's at the determination of the building inspector. It's important to note that nothing gets triggered until the building inspector says, this is a building scheduled for complete demolition.
Right.
The building inspector also reserves the right for any reason at any time, if it's a health or safety issue or anything like that, to order a demolition. So it does not in any way supersede, the building inspector's powers. So it's not for an alteration, or if you're putting dormers or something on, it does not include that. It's for complete demolition.
Right. And is my understanding correct that this is only triggered for any structures that are 100 years old or older, or not?
That's correct. 100 years old or older, but it would have to be considered historically significant.
Right, but
So
that's the
not just
trigger.
old. That's the trigger.
So if you're newer than 100 years, it doesn't
It's
come
not
into play at
triggered.
all. And then
Right.
if it's older than 100 years, it goes to the commission, you determine whether it's significant, and then that's the process, right?
That's the process, right?
All right. And then the only other thing, I think that I support this getting passed. I think that there might be some tweaks over time as you work with it.
Sure.
With the language, but I don't think I need to go into those. I think we'll see how it operates, and can tweak it over time, but, I'm an attorney, so I could nitpick
Sure.
language here and there, but in general, these things work very well. you know, we won't see it come into play quite as much in some place like Scituate because we don't really have a historic commercial district. That's mostly been lost already. So you see it very useful in places like a Salem or somewhere like that where they still have.
Yeah, there are some. I
There's
mean,
some, yeah.
they've been, frequently have been muddled.
Yeah,
So it's hard to tell that they're significant or historic. So
yeah.
when they're that muddled, they start to lose their historical significance as well.
Yeah, I would have loved to have seen this passed, you know, I don't know, 30, 40, 50 years ago.
Would have been
Yeah.
nice,
Yeah.
yeah.
So I definitely support it, so I think it's great you're bringing this up, and I think it's important for the town to have it.
I was just surprised to see the extensive list that got me emailed over. Is that a list that you all have already looked at and made determinations on?
No, we haven't made determinations on them, and I think each one would be taken individually.
Uh-huh.
It's an extensive list, but it's by no means completely comprehensive. In order to survey the rest of the town, the whole town, it becomes very expensive.
Mhm.
So, but what I want to emphasize is that, you know, just because something is old does not necessarily make it historic. And I think that judgment has to be made, and that judgment should not be subjective, it should be objective. And it should be based on materials like those Form Bs that are the beginning of the analysis to say whether it's something really, you know, significant, historic. For example, you know, one I passed around there is the Mordecai Lincoln House.
Uh-huh.
Abraham Lincoln's great-great-great-grandfather. It was built in 1690, sitting over there for 323 years. If somebody bought that tomorrow, they could walk up to Town Hall the next day and take it down. Now, my feeling is that something that's been in that neighborhood, that sort of set that neighborhood up 300 years ago, it's very much part of the character of the community. I just think it's something you need to take a look at. You can't prevent it from eventually being torn down if that's somebody's intent, but I think we need to at least take a look at something that significantly historic.
Yeah, and I think that's the important point about this to note is that it is a demolition delay, is what it is.
It's not a prevention. It
So
doesn't,
it doesn't take away property rights, it does delay it, and I think you've got a 12-month limit. So even if the commission deems it historic, 12 months is the longest they can delay it, and if they don't come to some agreement, or somebody buys out the owner, or, you know, works it out, it can still happen. So I
Yeah.
think some people have concerns about, you know, this is taking people's property rights away and all that kind of thing. At the end of the day, it's a delay, and it gives people an opportunity to discuss alternatives for the site, so that you don't wake up one morning and the Mordecai, you know, Lincoln House is just gone.
Yeah.
And no one had a
It-
chance to say, hey, there's an alternative, so.
I think it's a great effort to try to preserve all this, but by passing it, what you do is you immediately take any house that's over 100 years old and sort of put them in this question mark phase. And that was the sort of, I think the reaction was, what does that do to the homeowner who never had to deal with this before?
well, I mean.
Or the property owner, and
I
suddenly
think,
they've got this
yeah.
sort of quasi, what is this?
Well, I think, you know, only if you're gonna demolish it. You know,
Yeah,
if
but
you own it and it's.
Well, yeah, you say that, but it's something that's going to I mean, for them, if they own a house that's older than 100 years old, they suddenly have a restriction on it that they didn't have the day before.
Right,
Okay?
I'm including my own house. My own house is.
No,
falls
I'm
under
not,
that,
I'm not,
and-
I'm not saying
yeah.
it's good or bad, it is a fairly significant sea change from one day to the
Yeah.
next.
I mean, I guess,
for a number
I've
of
had,
homeowners.
I've had quite a few conversations with people about, you know, homeowner rights and so forth, but if you really think about it, you know, there's lots of your rights maybe get, you know, questioned. The planning board. I mean, when somebody comes forward to you with an idea, you typically have lots of questions. We have a conservation commission, we have a building inspector, we have a board of health. We have all these sort of avenues that look at folks' homeowners' rights. And I guess our hope is that, you know, the historic piece is one of the first things thought of, not the last. You know, if it's your intention that you want to demolish this historic property and put up something new, well, you can do that. But I guess we would hope is that, you know, you look at the historic piece first, not last. And that seems to what has happened in some of the homes that we've seen that have been raised. It's just, it's sort of, they make all the plans, and the very last thing is, oh yeah, we have to go pull a building permit to get it raised. And if we had some opportunities, I know, Steve, we've talked about a few properties that we would have liked to have been able to move or do something else with, or at least document. At least do a real, in-depth documentation of the property, photograph it and things like that, so the records could be.
Could be an interesting use of CPC funds.
Right. In terms of this bylaw, or this, bylaw that you drafted, how is this, what did you model it on? Are there other towns that this is similar to?
There are lots of other communities. There's a recommended bylaw from Massachusetts Historical Commission. Ours, through a lot of discussions with folks in town, but, a lot of discussions with the building inspector, we made some of the changes, like the velocity zones. The biggest thing we wrestled with was the economic issue. If somebody, was struggling financially and their best opportunity was to take a historic home and to demolish it because they have an opportunity to develop the back 20 acres for some kind of a subdivision or something like that, that we didn't want to be the obstructionist or standing in the way of somebody who could, who was in some sort of a financial hardship. So we added that, and that's, we believe it's the only town that has that.
We have looked at a plan off of Country Way that potentially could fall into that realm, across from Black Beach.
305.
Right.
Yep.
It's right on the curve.
Sure.
I guess one of the things that I'd wonder is if we've got that before us already and this bylaw passes, is that plan gonna fall under this bylaw? I'm just curious,
I would think it would. I mean, they'd have to pull
Yeah.
up.
because they
Demolition
haven't
permit
gone
if they needed
forward.
one, yeah.
Sorry.
They haven't gone
If
forward
they applied for the
sufficiently.
demolition permit
be
before this
beyond it.
got passed.
Yeah,
then-
right,
Yeah.
okay, just curious.
Which may happen.
I think it would actually be July 1st. I mean, it still has to get reviewed by the.
The
State
Attorney General's
and
office,
all
right,
that, so.
sure, absolutely.
To date, we've had people voluntarily coming to us and wanting to preferably preserve their property and looking for ways.
Here's an example.
I
of
would
one
think that would be the typical case, rather than the other way around.
This was
I
an
would
example
hope.
of somebody who wrote to me in June. The property is 678 First Parish Road, and it was built in the late 1600s. It's known as the Cottage Farm. And as you can see, the owner in that case was very concerned about the property, but had been given a recommendation that
Oh,
it
I
should be
know this
raised
one, yeah.
by the Realtor. And we worked with her.
Corner of Branch
Obviously,
Street.
she felt a certain responsibility, and the property ended up being, have a preservation restriction placed on it, and it was actually donated to a nonprofit in town. So it did two things. It saved the building with the preservation restriction, and then it provided some funds for a nonprofit organization fairly significant.
And I would imagine in some instances too, people may not understand necessarily the historic nature of.
She did. She understood what it was, but oftentimes people don't. So at least like that opportunity to have the conversation with them, so they do understand what they're
It's an
tearing down.
educational opportunity.
Right.
Yeah. And I see this list here that you gave us. I mean, do you have an idea of how many private homes in Scituate, like a guesstimate of how many there are that are over 100 years old?
Something like 30, I would have to look at the housing stock numbers, but there was something like 3,300 homes built before 1950. So I'm guessing, and there was a lot of building, 40s, 50s, so I'm guessing it's somewhere 2,000 maybe.
Yeah.
1800s.
What
I
about,
could find out if you really.
have any idea
One
on
of the-
commercial properties, non-residential stuff? I'm trying to think of
That
around
are
town.
considered
That are over
historic.
100 years old that would fall under this.
The Welch
The Welch
Company.
I know,
Years
it's the first
ago.
one that comes to mind,
Yeah,
but.
right.
North Scituate, Severn Store,
The old depot at North Scituate,
the which one?
the old depot across from Wilder Brothers?
Yes.
The Welch Company's a good example of one that did get saved.
Yeah, it's really good.
Almost by chance.
Through a lot of work, yeah.
Places aren't easy.
Right, exactly.
It's the same with the Maury building. That's a classic example where they were able to say the front part of it.
Right, and that's a great example. I mean, it's about historic preservation. It's not about development or anything like that, but I just think there's opportunities, if you raise it, there's great examples of historic buildings that get incorporated into something like the Maury building or get reused. There's opportunities for tax credits with Mass Historical Commission on reuse of historic buildings for commercial properties. I'd like to raise that awareness. it all kind of ties together. I think they don't have to be in conflict all the time. Again, it's a speed bump, but right now we have nothing.
Yeah, and I know when you look at the map of the other towns that have it, I mean, it's quite extensive throughout Massachusetts. It seems that, once towns learn about this, they tend to adopt it, so.
Yeah, the thesis of the bylaw that I've had concerns about is, once you've come back and you've identified a priority property,
Preferably preserved.
preferably preserved property, and once that's identified, how do you come back and ensure that something is being done to save that piece of property between that and where it times out in a year?
So that's sort of the commission's responsibility, to say, if we put on that preferably preserved status, our goal is immediately to work with the owner of that property to say, are there alternatives, are there solutions?
But they don't have to work with you, that's the difference, so you hope that
They
they
don't,
will.
right, they
but
don't have to work with
they're
us.
not
I mean, at
obligated.
some
They
point,
can
if
just
somebody
wait a
is
year.
just,
They can-
yeah, if somebody
wait a
just
year.
sort of, folds their arms and says, we're not doing this, trust me, it's getting torn down. I mean, at some point, you just have to say, well,
Yeah,
we couldn't save that one, and maybe it's not worth it. But at the same time, if it's very significant, what could we do? Could we get somebody to move it? Could we get somebody to buy it? Could we, come up with some sort of an alternative to the demolition? That's sort of the goal.
Demolition isn't without cost itself, and some of the builders we've talked to said, it's actually more economical for me just to give this or sell it for a buck.
And give some of the funds to help try to move it, because it's gonna cost me
Right.
$10,000 or something to demolish it and haul everything
Or
away.
dispose of the materials.
I think, was it Mr. Litchfield at advisory when I was there, I heard you talking about the barn, right? That-
And they moved it. yeah.
That's an interesting example, because the house, this was Dr. Moran's house at 2 Country Way by the road, where the medical center is. I remember when that whole issue came up, the house, because it's a really neat old house, very old, I think the Historical Society raised a ruckus about it and convinced the developer to save the house, because they were gonna level everything.
Mm.
I found out about it and managed to move the barn down the road and sitting on my property now.
Yeah. So-
It
so-
cost me $16,000 to do the move, it cost me a lot more to get it ready, but I've got myself a big, huge barn that I probably couldn't have built for the money I spent on it. And, the developer was glad to get it out of there. In fact, I got the pool house and another little shed, if I could get them out of there, and brought them home too.
Yeah, sometimes it can be kind of mutually beneficial, the homeowner can save some money, you can get maybe CPC money to kick in or something, so you can work out some good solutions and.
Can try.
Not that it was in
Good try,
Scituate,
that's
but
right.
a very high-profile one was the Pillar House that was on 128, like actually in the interchange there, that got moved and is now a private residence.
They actually took that one apart and put it
Yeah.
back together,
Mhm, yeah.
which is another option.
Frank Snow, who was here earlier, recently moved a barn across the street on Clap Road, so.
There are a lot of deadlines that fall on the commission to meet in order for this process to move through expeditiously, so that
I can show you that too.
the option of, or likelihood of it going for a year without a decision are rare, I would say
Yeah.
rare. It's upfront, as.
This is much neater than one that I drew out.
As we've said.
That works, sorry.
It may not indeed be historic at all, and then it's a quick decision, and
Yeah.
Mhm.
and they move forward, and then, and the investigation and so forth, we have to do in a timely fashion.
Yeah, we can't sit on the application, right?
Yeah. Are there criteria as to what is historic?
So it is outlined in the bylaw, and it's also, it somewhat mirrors what makes it eligible for listing on the National Register of Historic Places. So its age, it's historically, significant either by design or architecture or something like that. Or the third one is really, it's associated with somebody who is of historical significance. So a good example I could give
Mordecai
you
Lincoln.
recently would be like the purchase of the Abigail and Rebecca Bates house on Jericho Road. Not only is it old, and it's very significant that way, but the people who were there, Abigail and Rebecca Bates, and it was a lighthouse keeper, so that's a good example.
And as I recall, you're going out and affirmatively trying to identify these historical buildings ahead of time, so that if I'm a homeowner or I own a building, I already know that I have a historical building before I even get down.
You would know that through the Form Bs is a good start. but not every historic building in Scituate has had one of those.
No, I understand that, but there's a good chance that I might.
Yeah, the research is done on it,
And
and there's a
certainly,
good explanation.
yeah, certainly people would then would not be surprised. You know, they'd say, I know this is the case.
Or if they have a question.
Yeah.
they can always
And most people, when they're getting ready to do an improvement to real property, it takes them a year to sit down and start planning the thing out and getting their financing together. They should be surprised.
I mean, yeah, you don't really, if it's a nice sunny day out, you don't wake up and look around and say, gee, I think I'll tear my house down today. And it doesn't happen like
Yeah.
that. It takes a long time. It takes planning. It takes,
Although a developer might, spring on you
Sure.
More quickly,
Sure.
if that was the intent of
Yeah.
getting to the backland, that kind of thing.
And the other thing is that the house may have been messed with or improved or renovated so many times that.
Right.
it loses its,
And at worst case scenario, if we even get the opportunity to document what's there.
Yep.
photograph it.
We've documented the information about the construction and so forth.
Sure.
That's a step towards preservation.
I noticed from the map that we were able to look at from Mass Historical that I think Cohasset and Scituate are the only communities in this area that don't have one of these bylaws. I was kind of surprised that Cohasset didn't.
Cohasset has local historic districts though, which
They
is
do.
much more restrictive.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
Oh,
much
that was,
more. I mean, that's
that
telling
was
you
the
what color you
difference
can
then.
paint your house.
And just because something finds its way onto the National Register, that doesn't preserve it either.
Yeah, there's no protections with National Register.
Now, these hearings are to be held in front of you all, right?
That's correct.
Okay.
And so when you're done,
I think-
you've made a decision, this is preferred or whatever you call it,
Preferably preserved.
preferably preserved. And then the other is it's just old. It's like.
Just
it has
old and
no-
the demolition permit's issued. If you look at that, it just goes.
Good thing we're talking about houses and not people.
Yeah.
James on 66 Manlock Road, is this a special permit process under the law? And if so, what is the appellate process?
It's
And what are the standards for submission, the plan review requirements, timelines, and so forth?
So the timelines I just handed to the board is like this. I can give that to you.
Thank you.
So that's the timeline. So the process begins when the applicant would pull a permit for demolition with the building inspector. That's sort of step one. And if the building inspector determines that it's over 100 years old, then they'll be given a packet of information to fill out that says, how old is the house? So then, from that point, the commission has to respond within 7 days, back from the building inspector.
Okay, I can follow the.
You follow
flow chart.
that, yep. So,
I go to the hearing process.
we go to the
what is
hearing
being-
process.
What is being heard? Is this a special permit?
There's no
There's
permit at all involved.
No, there's no permit being
No permit.
issued. What it is,
And
it's
what
a,
is the penalty for noncompliance?
It's pretty steep.
yeah, it's in the.
300 bucks.
300 bucks a day.
If you, well, you'd be tearing down something that you were not given a permit to do so. So the building inspector would not issue you
All right, then.
a permit. So if you decide to go tear down your house without a building permit,
Understood.
then, yeah.
So what is my appeal to the building inspector's finding or decision to refer this? Is it to the zoning board of appeals, which is the appellate board for all decisions made by the building inspector? Or is
You
it?
could try.
I just, as a long-term member of this planning board for many years, I just see this getting all convoluted between various boards, authorities, and permit granting bodies.
Well-
Should there be a conflict?
Mhm.
Should there be a disagreement? Developer, I own 3 houses, one of which is almost 200 years old. Developer comes to me and says, I want your backland, but you gotta tear your house down, and I'll give you 10 days to make a decision. I have a problem, the way I read this.
Well, you could make the decision, but again, you have to, in order to tear your house down, even if this wasn't in place, you still have to go to the building inspector.
Oh, yeah. No
So you
problem.
go to the building inspector and he says, Mr. Hunt, it's over 100 years old, this needs to be reviewed because we have a demolition review bylaw in place. It gets reviewed by the historical commission and we say, Mr. Hunt, This is a very significant historical building. You make your case why you need to have it torn down, you give us everything that you have on it, and we say it needs to be preferably preserved. We notify the building inspector, he's not gonna issue you a building permit for that 12-month period.
And so my avenue of recourse is to ZBA, I assume?
You could question the determination of the 100-year by the building inspector, and you could appeal that to the ZBA on the 100-year issue only. And then from the ZBA, you could appeal it to the court if you still disagreed with the 100-year. But after that, their determination of significant on historical is gonna be an arbitrary and capricious standard, you know, which I think most times you're gonna lose. If they determine it's significant,
See,
then
that's
the
issue
delay
for-
kicks in.
That's the issue for me, and believe me, I have no intention of doing any of this, but I hear the issue being, what is the standard of review? I mean, it's not a special permit, it's not a variance, so that the hardship argument goes away. If it's not a special permit, which requires very specific thresholds to meet, once you meet those thresholds, you qualify. What is it, and to what standard must I perform, and what is it gonna cost me to perform to that standard? Plan submission, plan review requirements?
Oh, there's none of that with a demolition delay, none of that. This is only your demolition, they have this in the majority of all the towns around us, and I've dealt with it in other towns as well. This is just a delay on you getting your demolition permit. That's it, has nothing to do with entitlements or anything else. It's just purely, you cannot pull your demolition permit until you get through the 12 months. If you don't want to cooperate at all, even if they determine that, you still get your demolition permit after 12 months.
12 months, that's a long time.
It is.
Some are longer in some towns and some are shorter. I think the
Some
shorter
have 20, some have
70.
24 months, I think,
is
so,
actually the
yeah.
recommended timeframe. We opted
Yeah.
not to do 24 months. I think
Right.
you're gonna know fairly quickly whether you can, if you have a cooperative person on the other end.
But it is,
I harken back, I was chairman of the planning board when Meeting House Inn was torn down, and that was a big deal, that was a huge deal. And this,
But there was no prevention in place, right?
no, there was none, not at
So
all.
so there was no determination
It
you
turns
could
out
make.
the argument of whether, to what historic standard was it compared, was the crux of the issue. And there was no real agreement about how historically significant that place was.
That's why I would argue that the work that was done through the Form B historical surveying, it's not
Right.
done by just anybody, it's done by preservation consultants, that if you look at those forms, they're making a very, important determination as to what is making that
Okay.
historic and whether it's eligible, for example, listing on the National Register. So that's the baseline, and I think that's an important point, that this is not subjective, this is objective as to what those evaluations have done. Now, if you want to challenge the ability of the historic preservation consultant, I guess you could do that, but unless you had somebody else that you hired yourself to say, this is not significantly historic and this is why. So that, I would say that's the difference, is that we don't want it to be subjective, we want objectivity to it, and it's based on the data, it's based on that research.
I would also say that I don't think this isn't written in a way that the homeowner could just, fold his hands up and wait 12 months. It really obligates the owner to cooperate, to do a few things here. So it's not like they can, that you could just sit on it.
I think it's everybody's best interest to try to cooperate.
No,
Now,
my
there's gonna be
point- no, no,
examples
no,
where it doesn't happen.
I understand
but-
that. I guess my point was, we were saying that, well, you could just sit there and do nothing. The way this is written, that is not what you could do. It's written with an obligation, a responsibility for the owner to do certain things. So, it doesn't have that kind of flavor. It requires that the owner, facilitate the process, that he allows access to the property, that he participates in the investigation and actively cooperates to seek alternatives. So it's not a, if I'm not interested, I won't participate kind of standard.
Although there's no
affirmative
way to force,
There's no way to enforce that, right?
Right, and then it
That's the
may fall
intent.
back to this issue of, well, you haven't been cooperative, so, there's a delay in your 12 months and, those kinds of things. So I do think
It
it's
has
kind
to
of
be
open
issued
to
within the
those kind
30
of.
days, though.
No,
if you don't.
I looked at that
Within the
language
hearing
too,
is held.
that's section 5, responsibility of the owners, and I didn't like the language, but when I actually looked at it, I don't think it's legally enforceable anyway, and it also says it's the responsibility, but it doesn't say the owner shall allow this and shall do this and shall, you know, so it's sort of,
Well, you leave it all up to interpretation then.
you do. I mean, I don't think, that's one of the issues I had with the language. I don't think it's perfect, you know, and if in practice it proves to be problematic, I think, you know, you go in a future town
Difference
meeting and,
between a speed bump and a stop sign.
yeah, exactly, yeah, amend it a little bit, but, you know, I think it's similar to other language I've seen, and
Is there this sort of documentation for most of the properties that you think you may get involved in with this?
I think so, because those were targeted on, which I think we're gonna have a discussion at some point about scenic roads. They sort of, the way to determine it is to sort of target the old roads in Scituate first. So Country Way, First Parish, and things like that. So if you look at the list, that's what Clap Road, those were the areas that were targeted first.
Okay.
But there could be one that, you know, there could be some that we missed that are significantly historic. But what I would say is that it would be the commission's responsibility to come up with equal or greater than research than is provided in something like that Form B, because if you
Historic
don't.
Society spent years also developing and offering dates of construction on the books, on the houses, as you're
Right.
probably aware.
Right.
And the T was mandated too, within a certain number of feet of where the T.
To do it.
Okay, yeah.
But there's a few gaps we've missed. and
There's a
few
big chunk of First Parish Road
that
that
wasn't
was
done.
completely overlooked.
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
Mm.
My house.
Yeah. But we would have to, again, it's that level of research.
But
And
you'd
it's
be
not-
looking for something as substantial as this,
As
to make,
substantial, and if you
on
look,
which to base your decision.
that's correct, and if you look in the back, the bibliography, I mean, they start with maps.
Mhm.
That's the first thing you do, you look at the maps, then you move from maps to assessor's records, and you move from assessor's records to.
You're paying for all this?
No, that was, a lot of it was paid for by the MBTA, the first chunk. They were required to do that, and then it was CPC funding, but we feel most of the town has been done. Any additional ones that would have to do would be our, our responsibility.
You know, I kind of like what Dan had to say, and that is, we don't need to be perfect, but we do need to start.
We gotta do something,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, absolutely.
And we can fix this as we go along. You know, assume that we're all reasonable people and we're all trying to work to the common good and preserve
Right.
individual property rights and
Right.
make our communities better.
That's right.
And as several of you have said, and the Welsh Company was a prime example of, you know, it wasn't until there was
Yeah,
a lot of discussion, objection, and public outcry in the papers and so forth that.
And people were saying, you mean, there's nothing that can be done? I'm like, there's nothing that can be done.
Well,
There's no,
my office is in the Welch Building,
do you like
and
it?
it's as cool as can be. You know, people come down and I say, yeah, it's 100 years old, and they won an award, and it's here.
And which one of the 16 levels are you on?
I don't know, you know, you go up sometimes they go up the elevator and sometimes they go up the stairs, and it's interesting, because the town that I grew up in as a kid was younger than I was.
Is that right?
Yeah, and, you know, so here I am in this town that's 400 years old, and with these buildings that have been around forever. And it provides a great sense of longevity.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes,
Yeah,
yes,
good.
we like to keep it that way,
Try anyway.
or try to.
Well, and,
Right.
and as was mentioned with, before, that it has an economic, factor to it as well, and that it's not only the character of the town. And it's ironic because, you know, in this age of economics, when a real estate agent says, you know, you'll get more money if you tear the house down, let somebody build a mega house here. That's not necessarily the direction that we think the citizenry wants to go. If they, I guess the town meeting will tell.
There's another thing that kind of happened to me. Right up the street, there used to be a little bitty Cape Cod, about 3 houses up on First Parish from here. And they built a house right behind it. And the date bought it was 1697. And I have a piece of land out on Country Way that would have accommodated that house just super.
Mm.
And I'd already moved to Barnes, so I wasn't too scared about moving the house. And we would drive by it every once in a while and say, well, what are they gonna do with that house in their front lawn? And one day we went by and there was an excavator knocking it down, and about a week later, I found out I could have had that house for $1,
Mm.
and I would have saved it.
Yeah.
It didn't look like much, but it was an old cape, and I love old capes, and I knew the guts of it was still an old cape. It's kind of unfortunate, because we could have moved that and saved it and rented it and had another rental property in town.
I'm
And
telling you.
the thing about the demolition thing is, it brings an awareness that I wasn't able to take advantage of. And after the fact, I find out this house is available, and I would have acted on it a year before and get it off the guy's property, and he'd been done with it. And the demolition going into effect is gonna at least have people looking around saying, hey, who wants this house? Put it in the paper, tell people, whatever. I think the only thing that happened with that one was they did go to the Historical Society, but the society's got enough property, and so they just kinda said, we don't want it. You know, what will we do with it? So they just, it kind of fell on deaf ears, as a matter of speaking. So, that's another aspect that this law sort of helps people out.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you
Well, thank
guys for
you.
coming in.
All right,
Appreciate
thanks.
I think you have our support.
Do you wanna make it formal?
Would we like to do that?
It wouldn't be a bad idea.
I'd make a motion to let the planning board go on record as being supportive of this bylaw.
I would second that.
Discussion? All those in favor?
I would certainly
Aye.
support that. Aye.
And again, I think the comment too, you know, I, like Eric as well, you know, I could pick through this
Mr.
language
Litchfield?
all day long and
Mr. Litchfield?
improve on it, but if
We
it's
just voted to support
90%
your
right
article.
and maybe 10% problematic, I'd rather
Tell Mr.
pass it
Smith.
and
Yeah.
work on the details as we
So
go
we'll-
along
we'll-
than
we'll
not
s-
pass something.
So
The
we're,
board voted to
This all
support
we're
did
it.
it,
officially
right?
on
If you're gonna
record
fail,
as
fail
supporting.
quick, you know, figure it out.
Yeah.
By the way, where does that, just curious, where does that go? I mean, is that printed in the paper, or is that,
It's on the town meeting.
We'll do it at town meeting.
okay.
It's on the warrant, yeah.
Now, we can either adjourn or we can listen to Mr. Hunter. It's Form A. The floor is yours, sir.
4.
Tell us what you want to do.
5 minutes. Property on 66 Manlot Road was Form A, an A&R in about 11 years ago. The intent was to transfer the lot that was created by that A&R to my daughter. Those plans have changed, and I'm now reconsidering a reverse Form A in lieu of an 81X plan. And we're just doing away with that lot because I'm tired of paying taxes on it.
Makes sense to me.
Great idea.
Laura?
No, no issues, you know, no new buildable lot, no problem with endorsing it.
Discussion from the board?
Reduce your taxes.
Nice piece of land.
Yeah.
I've seen one of these recently, that's interesting.
I know where it's combined.
Drive by it every day, twice a day.
Yeah.
Well, the
Very
stakes
well.
and the lot lines are gonna disappear quickly. Do I have a motion?
All right, excellent. I move to endorse as approved under the subdivision control law, not required, a plan of lots at 66 Manlot Road, Scituate, prepared by Mr. MR Surveying Incorporated for applicant James C. and Helen A. Hunt, dated July 19th, 2012, as the division of the tract of land shown on the accompanying plan is not a subdivision because it shows a proposed change in a lot line which does not alter the existing frontage as required under the Scituate zoning bylaw.
Have a second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Will you sign tonight?
No, I'll sign them in. I may sign them tonight, you get them in the morning.
Okay, so do I get the Mylar and what, how many copies?
However many copies you want. I mean,
I'd like them all back, except for that which requires the town clerk filing, because I want to hand walk it through engineering and assessors.
Oh, okay, we usually keep 3, we give 1 to building, 1 to DPW, and we keep 1, and then,
Whatever's left,
yeah, okay.
okay? And I'll record it next week. All right? Thank you.
Is your wife the actress?
Always a pleasure.
Always. Better you than me.
Well, you've been here, so.
So if people have this plan, if they can kind of pass them.
Oh,
You have mine.
What are we passing now?
The 66 man lot, because Jim wants them back.
Got an application.
yeah.
Do you have the plan that goes with it is what we're looking for?
Good night, thank you.
Oh, the plan that goes with it.
Yeah, you don't need the application, right?
No, I don't need the application, he just wants.
Well, I don't need it, so.
Next item we got is a Form A for Jericho Lane. Paul?
Okay.
This one.
Not so easy.
What we're doing is, 2 or 3 years ago, the board endorsed a plan for a movable lot behind number 7, and it had 15,000 square feet. The access area, lot, selling the parcel A and still leaving the lot as a buildable lot.
Laura?
There was a plan endorsed, with 2008, sorry about that. And, at the time, there were some improvements that were agreed on that would be done, because this road actually is a little bit problematic. It's 8 feet wide. There's no ability for a fire truck to turn around. There's not much in the way of places to pull off. It's just a really narrow little gravel road. It'd be difficult for 2 cars to pass going in different directions. So the owner had agreed to make some improvements to it. Nothing has really been done yet. We did get an email from the fire chief late this afternoon, which we sent around. I think we put copies in your folders. He still wants to see some improvements. So I guess, you know, my feeling about this is a really good time to get the improvements. I know it is similar to a plan that was endorsed just a couple years ago, but it was all done with kind of a handshake and a gentleman's agreement type thing, and, you know, unfortunately, that doesn't seem like that worked. So what you could do, if you really want these improvements to happen, is you could say, look, you know, just take the plan back for now, make the improvements, and come back in when the improvements are made. What that would do would be, it would just get the road wider up to this new lot. So it wouldn't, you know, go, you know, it wouldn't be a huge cost, most likely, but you would at least get that done. Or, you know, you can take some other approach to it.
What?
What improvements were supposed to be done? I'm not sure I'm following.
It was supposed to be widened, and then there was also some discussion about a hydrant. And the hydrant maybe is not directly connected to access, but the widening.
So these are all improvements related to fire service then?
Fire and also just general access. I mean, when you got somebody coming out at you and you're in the road.
Yeah, I've driven up that road.
Yeah,
It's
so
pretty narrow.
Yeah.
Some neat little houses
Is it
up there.
particular to this particular house, or is it the whole road?
Does this parcel have frontage on Beaver Dam as well?
No.
It looks from the locust plan that it does.
Yeah,
I
that's what
know.
I was wondering too.
Yeah, I thought about that too.
I think there
Wait a
might
minute,
be.
Paul.
Can I explain
probably
something?
locust plan.
Sure.
When we did the first lot, I met out there with the fire chief and the deputy fire chief. We spoke to the water department, Paul Scott. You have correspondence in your file, which we aren't changing, and and the owner is not going to renege on that. But the agreement was that the road would be widened to 20 feet. This is all documented with the previous Form A. There is to be a hydrant out on the corner of Jericho Road and Jericho Lane, and the road was gonna be widened and paved up to the end of the lot.
Hmm.
And he did that for safety reasons, because the fire trucks do go down there, they do go all the way to the end and back out to Porter Road. What this plan is simply taking that 3,000 square feet off of the buildable lot. If and when someone goes to build on that lot, they're still compelled to make the improvements that were agreed to on that Form A plan that was originally signed. We aren't doing anything to change the buildability of that lot. It's still a buildable lot. The one 2 years ago was a buildable lot. This one is. He's simply taken the excess area, I think it's 3,000 square feet off, and holding that in reserve. But in order to get a building permit on that, he fully intends and expects to have to make those improvements that he agreed to. That's all documented in your file.
So you're taking what, lot 2 and chopping off parcel A out of lot 2?
Right.
Is that what you're doing?
Yes.
Does it in fact have frontage on Beaver Dam?
Beaver Dam?
I don't think so.
No, the locust plan
Oh, the locus shows
doesn't-
having frontage.
shows that, but I guess it's not the case.
The locus is confusing because it shows it abutting Beaver Dam.
That's wrong.
Yeah, okay.
Okay.
All right,
You
fine.
have that, up on Beaver Dam, you got that basement foundation thing that hole in the ground.
Okay,
And those houses along there.
okay. Yeah, no, that's right. There's another set of properties between
Yeah.
this parcel and Beaver Dam.
The other way to look at it, the Form A, the original Form A is still out there. He could go, and, pull a building permit on that plan today. And he'd still have to make the improvements.
Right.
I guess if you don't wanna play, hardball, you could also just endorse this, but, include in the motion that a building permit shouldn't be issued until these improvements are made. And I think the other thing that we should do, if you do decide to do that, is send some kind of a memo to Neil so that it, maybe can go in his files.
Just reinforce it.
I don't know what kind of a system he keeps for checking on these things. I think it may be really hard to check on all the different plants that have conditions that, like this over the years, but, I think that's certainly an alternative to do.
It certainly might be a lot more palatable to incur the cost of paving the road and putting in a fire hydrant if you're getting a building permit and you're gonna start construction.
I mean, I guess my question is whether we should add a note to this plan that say, this is endorsed subject to complying with the conditions on the former one, and then you get it part of the recorded
Yeah.
document. I mean, if that's your intent, you're telling us you're gonna comply anyway, that would solve that issue, and then we've got it recorded, because my fear would be you record this and it has no reference to it, and it kinda gets lost in the chain of title. It could be as simple as that, just make it a condition of the approval, and
That's fine.
wouldn't that be easy to?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, technically, you can't condition a Form A, but you can certainly put a note on there and see what happens. I mean,
Well, I guess legally, they're either obligated or not obligated to comply with the prior conditions, right? So it would at
Yeah.
least call it to
Well-
everybody's attention.
yeah, I mean, I think if you put it in the motion, it's in the minutes, and then I think if we send a memo over to Neil, that would be,
Well, I'd rather see it on the note, though. I mean, if it is something we're trying to call to everybody's attention.
This
Meg-
would almost be an amendment to the original 2008 package.
yeah, I mean, I think as long as it's not a land court plan, it probably won't get wiped off, is
Yeah,
that?
it might, yeah.
The other thing too is, where this is a division of land, which is what, you obviously are required to endorse the plan. Once they go for a building permit, if they don't feel it's safe or adequate, they can require them to do all this work. They're also talking about putting in a separate water service into that house in Jericho Road as well, because the water main in there is pretty small.
I think that's all important and good, but the only problem is that it's very likely gonna be someone else coming in for the building permit who doesn't know any of these things. So I think it's really good if we can get it on the plan.
Even if it's just a reference, I mean, maybe you're right, maybe we can't really condition it, but we could reference. This is a
I think just try it and,
This is a revision of, or this is I don't know how you'd say the note, but something that it calls it to people's attention, I guess.
yeah, please see
Don't
Neil.
forget to put in the fire hydrant and pave the road.
Right.
Well, then we don't have to get into the legality of are the conditions an obligation, are they not? That was done a while ago.
So
It calls it to somebody's attention and looks at this, I don't know.
what's the note gonna say?
Don't forget to put in the fire hydrant and pave the
I
road.
think it would be I think it would be an informational note, basically, that would say, this property was subject to an A&R plan done this year that had certain conditions, and recorded book and
An
page.
agreement,
That's it.
was made by the owner
Yeah.
to put in a hydrant
Yeah,
and
just
light
a
the
rough
road.
informational note describing that there was a former A&R and here's where it's recorded and there were certain conditions on that plan and just,
Now, suppose he
that's it.
didn't come in to break off parcel A, and he came in to Neil to get a building permit.
Well, that's why I think it's a good idea to send Neil a
Well, no,
memo
we haven't done anything.
anyway.
I'm just sitting there saying, right now, if he
Well-
came in tomorrow and talked lot 2,
Yeah,
and parcel A there was no discussion about parcel A,
right.
and he wanted a building permit.
well, then we're all kind of up a gravel road with no access.
No, wouldn't,
But what you're
wouldn't he
saying
still
is-
have to do this
You'd still
upgrade?
have to, you'd still have to do it.
He wouldn't necessarily know. I mean, he wouldn't
He
necessarily
doesn't know from
about
the,
hydrant.
from the last time?
No, because we never sent a memo the last time.
Well, let me ask you
As
this,
far as I
like,
know.
How the heck is he supposed to know?
if the prior A&R never happened, and we're looking at this
Unless we
just as a
tell him,
pure
yeah.
Form A plan, like, which that's legally how we have to look at it, right? So it's got frontage on Jericho Lane. Is there an issue with Jericho Lane itself?
Well, yeah.
Private
I
way.
mean, you have to determine first that it existed when subdivision control was adopted, and it does look like it does from the maps that we've
Okay.
seen. The second thing that you need to look at is whether the surface, the width, the grade, are adequate for vehicle traffic, including emergency vehicles, and for installation of municipal services.
Right.
And where it's really only 8 feet wide, you can't have two vehicles, passing each other on it.
15
Um, Well, we have actually taken a measurement, we've got, pictures
There's
of,
a picture of
Karen
Karen right there
measured.
standing there, so.
and we've got pictures of the tape, and it's 8 foot 2 inches wide. I mean, maybe
Lot
the
of be-
layout
beyond
is
my
15
property.
feet, or it goes up on the grass, but the actual gravel surface is
It's like it
pretty
narrows.
narrow.
Well, it sounds to me
So-
like we either
Yeah.
condition the approval
Yeah.
or we don't then, and we can, we don't need to reference the prior A and R plan. If we want to condition it, we condition it now.
I mean, there's already an agreement in place, though, that I'm hearing, to widen the road, to put in the hydrant, to do what we want to see
Not
done.
written down.
There's an agreement that's kind of buried in our files, and it needs to be sort of unburied and just
So
made clear.
Well, with
let's
our- with our-
resurrect it and bring it to the front.
Yeah,
Yeah, I think all
so
that
if we
needs to
make
do is
Neil
rescind-
aware of that.
Yeah.
But, thinking about this sort of as an example of
Yeah.
other things that may be out there or may in the future be out there, it would be simple enough to tag every piece of property that's got this situation, that's got conditions or that we've seen and, commented on in Neil's computer, or, in everybody's computer, but Neil would know where to look for it, and just have it pop up when somebody comes in to pull a building permit.
I guess my question is, like, procedurally, if we're gonna condition it, then normally you'd have to say it's not an A and R, and then it'd have to come in as a regular subdivision, and then you'd throw on conditions, right?
Yeah.
Because the A and R decision, it
Yeah.
either is or it isn't, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So that's the
And
decision.
the question becomes, does that frontage, the answer is yes, and is the frontage adequate?
That's the
Provide-
question, is it
Yeah.
or not?
Is the road adequate?
Is the road adequate? Yeah.
Right, not the frontage, because
The frontage is there,
frontage is
but,
there.
No, I mean, there's two criteria. One is the frontage, and that's satisfied, and then the question is the road adequate.
right.
Then you got the issue is, last time we said the road was adequate because they were gonna do some improvements to it.
Right.
Yeah, I think you kind of danced around that road
So-
adequacy a
But
little
I
bit.
think the right way legally to do it, though, is if you think the road's not adequate and you need to add conditions, is you say, we don't see this as an A and R, they have to come back as a subdivision, and then you can put conditions on it, procedurally. So that's the decision.
Or he fixes or he makes the road wider.
Make
Well,
the
he
road
pulls
wider
it
now,
back.
and
I
then
mean,
come back to us later to approve it, I don't
The
know.
hydrant, I
Yeah,
think
you're
the
not-
hydrant is not in play. I think the only issue that you've got is the road.
You don't wanna do this road unless you're doing construction,
Yeah.
right? I
Right.
mean, you're
I
gonna,
mean,
not
there's
gonna
no
do it
point.
until
You're
there's.
gonna wind it in your construction financing, and
Right.
it's too expensive to pay for out of your pocket.
I'm fine with the way it is. I mean, it seems to me that there's no, I don't know why you decided to strike off parcel A, but that's not something that has anything to do with the road. If you never intended to build on this lot and just wanted to put a property line there where one didn't previously exist, we wouldn't have a thing to say about it.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah,
And it's they're striking off a unbuildable piece, so,
yeah.
Nothing on that plan, nothing on that plan relative to the larger lot changes from what you previously approved.
Correct. That's what I'm hearing, and if that's the case, then I don't see where there's a problem. We do need to notify Neil to make
Yeah,
sure
that's what I
that,
was gonna say.
I think that's a
prior
good
to
idea.
issuance of a building permit, either the construction's done or the plan that the building permit is based on shows the construction as a component of that plan, and you don't get an occupancy permit until that construction is complete and approved.
that makes sense to me, because striking off just this piece, if they didn't wanna do this, yeah, they're left with what they have now, whatever that is.
They could do
So
it.
does the construction permit, would it apply to the whole length of the road?
No, I think just to the property line, just to the new property line. is-
Yeah.
So just this stretch right here?
So it's gonna be done,
So
it's
what
gonna
about
be
this?
done.
That's what was agreed
It's
to
gonna be done
originally, I
piecemeal.
think.
Oh, they didn't agree to this piece?
No, I think they agreed,
They
well,
formed-
I don't know, was I here in 208? Because I don't
I'm just
remember
looking at
this.
the
I
line.
was.
I'm just looking at the
I can't
line.
remember
But I
back that far.
We created lot two, okay, and lot two still exists. We haven't done anything to change lot two by cutting off parcel A. And lot two would be the
No, I
pivotal thing.
wasn't
I
in
think it should be
208.
approved as it is.
I wasn't here in
Yeah, I
208, thank
tend to
God,
agree. That's fine.
because if I couldn't remember it, that would be bad.
It's kind of the Wild West
Yeah.
back in those
I
days.
think that makes sense.
Yeah, way back.
You have
in
a
those
couple
days.
different options.
Yeah, we had
Why does it
several
make
options,
sense
yeah.
to take this section and make it 20 feet wide and not.
I think we got a motion.
No,
It does-
it's all the way out.
Yeah, but if this person pulls a building
Change that if you
permit
want, I mean, this
No,
one.
I'm just
we
saying-
had-
on his lot,
This one we had the adequate
Right.
grade, if the
It's not a-
improvements were
you can't
required.
move it
Let's-
here.
Let's ask
required by the
Laura.
fire chief were made. So this one,
I think it's
It's
just
a little
move
bit-
to endorse the Form
The
A.
20 feet that you
Okay.
see,
And
I
then
think,
we'll send a memo. to
Steve,
the-
is.
Okay,
in
so that's
fact,
what this
the
is.
right of
basically.
way of this
Yeah,
road.
it's a
So
little-
the idea was to not, you're not building on this lot.
Okay,
You're
so I got a
only
motion.
going to the right of way.
Got a
I'm
motion to
just
move
trying
the
to get a
Form A.
clarification.
Do I have a second?
Wait,
Wait,
Steve's got something, I think.
Just discussion, is this a
Okay.
point of discussion?
We'll do the discussion, yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, so there's a lot 2 here.
yeah,
And if somebody pulls a building permit for lot 2, they'll widen this road to 20 feet along lot 2, but not along the existing lot or parcel A.
House in the
between
corner?
Jericho, Road and the driveway to Lot 2, they'll improve the road there. But they
they
won't go
don't
the
own
whole way up Jericho Lane.
But they don't own that other piece of lot. How can they do that?
He doesn't have to.
They'll have to all get together and improve it, unless you want them to just have like
He's
one
got the
small
right to do
part
it because he's got
improved.
access.
He's got rights to
Yeah,
do
you know,
it.
he's got rights over that road.
Okay, so
he
so
has
he
the
can
right to
be,
improve it.
he can be required to do it all the way to Jericho Road.
Yeah,
Oh, yeah.
The lot 2 owner can.
yeah,
Okay, that's what I was asking.
okay.
Yeah, because that would be kind of weird.
I think it would
Yeah, well,
make
that's what I was
sense
looking at,
to
is,
do it before the building permit, because the occupancy permit, that could be another whole person that gets that had nothing to do with
Right.
selling the property or making any kind of, money out of the lot. So I think you want it to be the building permit rather than the occupancy.
Yeah, but that's a no, that's a no that we're
Okay.
making, rather than just, because the
Okay.
motion is to
Chicken and
endorse
the
the
egg
Form
thing.
A.
Okay, the motions, you can just make a motion to endorse the Form A.
I think Richard's got the motion.
Richard's got the motion,
Mhm.
okay.
That's it. As long as we're all in agreement. Well, I guess we'll find out.
Yeah.
Richard, the motion reader.
I move to endorse as approved, under the subdivision control law not required, a plan of land in the town of Scituate located at Jericho Lane, Lot 2, prepared by Ross Engineering Company Incorporated for the applicant John please say that, McNamara, I'm sorry, and owner Tynan Family Realty Trust dated March 8th, 2013, as the division of the tract of land shown on the accompanying plan is not a subdivision because the lot has frontage on a private way in existence on August 3rd, 1947, when the subdivision control law became effective in Scituate, and has adequate width, grade, and construction for the building lot and parcel shown on the plan.
Do I have a second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
I'll sign these tonight. Thank you.
Yours, anything, right?
Huh? No, actually, I'll sign them tonight, we still got a whole bunch of stuff to go. You can pick them up tomorrow.
Later.
Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, John.
Okay, we are trucking right along, we are right on.
Right on schedule.
Right on
Somebody's,
schedule.
somebody's schedule.
Next
Letter.
item is a letter from Traffic Rules and Regulations Committee. I think you saw it. Basically, sidewalk in from the station in North Situate to Cohasset. I referred the letter to DPW. DPW came back and said that would be nice to do, but it's not a high priority. We're looking for funding. I responded with basically that information back to the originator of the letter with the CC, both to DPW and Traffic Rules. Any questions on that?
Nope.
Bylaw annual review meeting, town discussion? Annual town meeting discussion? Anything there?
I guess on the town meeting, I went to the advisory committee, I don't know, a week ago or so. And, you'll see they endorsed unanimously all of our articles.
Keeps falling off.
Then let's go pitch it.
Good job, Chris, Dan. You speak to the one on accessory dwelling?
Yeah, I'd be happy to.
Okay.
I think, yeah, we had a very good discussion about that, and, I think part of it was that, they recognized that we had spent a lot of time as a planning board dealing with that bylaw, and had seen what had worked and what hadn't worked, and they also acknowledged all the research we did into all the towns around us and the state model, and that we were not doing something out of the ordinary. And in fact, what we're proposing is much less restrictive than every other town around us. It's a big step forward for Scituate. It's a big improvement on what we have now, but it's by no means restrictive.
Should we invite the Garden Road neighbors and ask them specifically to come to the town meeting?
We did last time we saw them,
They're
so.
coming.
Okay.
Yeah,
Good.
it's a fine line, because they were at the ZBA meeting. Now, I didn't attend the ZBA meeting, but I think there was a concern that they were looking at kind of a misunderstanding of what the ZBA had to do in terms of the size of the addition relative to the original house.
How about the
Then they went back
paragraph
and they
6
talked about a
finding?
lot of the issues that came up during our meeting.
Oh, I see,
And those really wouldn't be germane to what we were talking about at town meeting. So my understanding is they're gonna be there anyway.
I think they're gonna be there anyway.
I think really, what we'd hoped they would speak to really was, the effect of the existing bylaw that it potentially had on their street, in terms of,
Yeah, the real world
size and
impact.
mass
Yeah.
and that kind of impact. That's really what we're looking to them to speak to, not the, all the necessary changes we're making, but, when we talk about how this would modify the result there, they can really speak to how impactful that was and, how they really mobilized the entire neighborhood.
Now, based upon, I guess, Bill's prior experience, are we really gonna have opposition to this at the town meeting?
I expect that we probably will.
Okay.
I know Mike Hayes has indicated that he's concerned about the process of verification, the yearly verification, and in particular the concern about the process, the impact it would have on a potential buyer of a piece of property.
Mike is.
Mike is,
Yeah.
what did I say?
I
Yeah.
was listening to something else, my other ear.
And I was gonna say, we did, I heard some of the concerns that were raised at the selectmen's meeting, and we went through all of those at advisory, and had, very confident arguments about why that was not an issue, and there really was no similar concerns raised by anyone in an advisory once they heard the explanation for how we got there. So I would suspect it's gonna pass easily, but there'll be some people that'll get up and wanna argue about stuff, but I think in the presentation, I'll raise those issues ahead of time.
Preemptively.
Yeah.
Because, I heard some of the comments, like someone apparently, a selectman, I think Mark was there as well at selectman, so he heard part of the argument. Someone raised the argument, is this even legal? Well, the language came from 3 other towns that have the exact same certain parts, so it's kind of some silly arguments about some of the stuff. And
Well, the AG's office has already passed on it.
Oh,
then,
yeah, there's no question that the size argument, it's too restrictive. Okay, well, it's less restrictive than Cohasset, Norwell, Marshfield, everybody around us, it's much more liberal. So there's just really not good arguments against it. So, and I think that some of the arguments are coming from some, what I characterize as more special interests.
Yeah.
So,
I think you just need to stand up and say, we're from the planning board, we know what we're doing, trust us.
Oh, don't say that.
That'd
I'll
be
say-
a first, probably.
That sums
You'll be
just about
the lead-in.
everything that I probably wouldn't say.
no, I think we can address, whatever arguments they want to raise, but it's clearly a justified thing, and, advisory, like I said, there wasn't one person who opposed it, and a lot of the other issues, you get a split vote, they all just said absolutely, and we talked about it for a good 45 minutes, probably, just on accessory.
Okay. Well, this will be interesting, because the planning board will be pushing it, the advisory board will be pushing it, and presumably the board of selectmen won't be.
And the bylaw review.
Yeah, so it'll be very, truly town government in operation.
Yeah, and I'm not sure the selectmen really are gonna say anything on it.
Yeah, I was just gonna say.
It comes out in the advisory committee
They may not
booklet
have
that it was supported 100% by advisory.
Understood it.
They can certainly speak to it if they want to, but I'd be kinda surprised, if they entered into the fold on that.
Legally, they have to make
They
their.
have to do, they have to make a report.
So they'll make their report, but it was a 4-to-1 vote for one thing, so people will kind of be wondering, well,
Yeah.
how come it was split and so on. But we did put in your packets a little kind of smorgasbord
Because the
of,
one was the lawyer.
accessory dwelling bylaws from different towns that have
Oh, that's what that was.
the special permit requirement on the transfer and ownership. So
Yeah.
that's in there.
Okay.
What's in here?
A little
This blurb?
smattering of different towns with.
Oh, yeah, I saw
bylaws.
that.
Yeah, when I was at advisory, I brought, the other bylaws with me that we used to draft this one, they said, what do they have in Cohasset? Well, they have this. What do they have in Marshfield? And it was,
Yeah, we didn't even include Cohasset or Marshfield.
Yeah.
So,
But,
we've got Norwell, Ludlow had it, and
Yeah.
someplace in Florida had it. Concord does something very similar, so.
and the one thing that, ours doesn't get into a lot of the other things, like requiring it to be a, blood relative and things. Some towns do have that. There are a lot of other restrictions, we didn't put in the one about the house has to be there for a number of, 10 years before you can do it. And, there's a lot of other, ours, even passing it with this amendment, will be the least restrictive probably on the entire South Shore, so.
But we've also found a niche where an accessory dwelling is a very useful tool
Yeah,
in town.
I think so.
Well, and it even says right here, it says, even with these proposed changes, Situate's accessory dwelling bylaws will be more lenient than those of surrounding
It's
towns.
significantly more lenient, so.
Okay, let's move on here. I'd like to get home before 11. The county,
We have 2 minutes to approve that I read over, right?
do you want to make a motion on those?
I don't remember the dates, but
Minutes.
I move that we approve the Scituate Planning Board minutes for February 21st, 2013, and the Scituate Planning Board minutes of March 14th, 2013.
Those are the ones that were sent out email.
Second?
Discussion, all those in favor?
Aye.
I just have to feel some comments just in here for like.
While they're sorting out the accounting, I have gone to 2 meetings on the Public Facilities Subcommittee. We met 2 weeks ago, I guess it was. We met down at the senior center. We walked through the senior center. We had a discussion about the senior center. We got a report from both the police and the fire chief as to the status of their buildings, the problems that they've got, shortcomings, the inability to provide certain functionality which is required. So in the last meeting, which was Tuesday, we went on a tour through this building, including the basement. We went through the police station and we went through the fire station so we could see firsthand what the issues were and have a sense of what the buildings actually were and the condition of the buildings. That's where we currently are. And I think they cabled it. I don't know whether they're gonna put it on cable or whether they're gonna have a CD that basically it's gonna be available to use. I think your wife took a significant number of
Yes,
pictures.
you should. Sounds like it was an informative trip.
Yes. I mean, most of the time you're in and out of town hall and that, but when you really sit there and you look at it.
Look at the
instead of-
guts.
I mean, just look at within the planning office. I mean, you've got, up until when, last year, right, there was really no privacy at all in the building, in that room. Right, so Karen's doing what she's doing with somebody, and Laura's doing what she does with somebody, and basically, there's no privacy at all. I mean, it's just, but thank God zoning is not an emotional issue, so we don't have to worry about things. But to see it all and then to see the mechanicals of how it's all put together. It's the liaison reports. County?
Right, yep. There are 2 purchase orders, so I move that we approve $25.59 to WB Mason for office supplies. In addition, $252.12 to JR Graphics for 1,000 sheets of planning board letterheads.
Second?
All those in favor?
Aye.
I got one other item, and that is the economic development. I sent a letter off to Joe Norton, Chairman of the Board of Selectmen, indicating that we had interviewed the candidates before, and made a recommendation to the Board of Selectmen, and then I offered the planning board services to do the same. And he came back and said that he had no problem doing that, but he was gonna check with the other board members, so I expected. And then we will do the same following the election, if we have an opening for the associate member.
You should have just put somebody's name on the ballot.
You can write someone in,
I mean, that's what we should have, yeah.
decide someone that you like.
How many signatures do we need to have to write somebody in? Is it just like,
None,
I
just
don't think
one?
any.
none, right?
Yours.
All you gotta do is write the name in.
You can write in, that's like the presidential election every year, somebody votes for Mickey Mouse,
Yeah.
and you can just write in whatever you want.
Who should we pick on?
Very,
Well, I know when,
Someone who's not gonna resign the next day.
I was gonna say, when,
Do that to one of your friends, right?
No, I was thinking Mr. Hunt here, we'll all get together, we'll all write his name in and we'll elect him.
who was the gentleman that had come in before?
yeah, exactly, when Stephen interviewed, we had
Yeah, what's his
Monty.
name?
Monty,
We all
yeah.
liked Monty as well, so
Yeah, I'll give Monty a call.
Yeah, reach out.
if he's interested, I'm happy to write his name
Yeah.
in, and he may
Is
win.
that all it takes?
That's all it takes is,
One
you know,
vote? and-
yeah.
Okay, that
We
brings
get
us
6?
to the town plenary report.
Just, I think two things. One thing is, I know we were all kind of excited about using that $10,000 from Laurelwood towards the Harbor Walk. And I got something back from the town accountant saying, yeah, you can do it, no problem. And then about 3 weeks later, I get another email from her saying she was in town accountant school and they had a class on these funds. And no, we couldn't just use it, that it had to go to town meeting. But she also suggested that I talk to town council, so I'm gonna do that and see if there's some other way without going to town meeting for that.
You know, this is one of those times when you just don't ever ask a question you can't bear to hear the answer to.
Yeah,
It's easier to ask.
Yes.
Permission.
Ask, yeah, exactly.
yeah. And the next thing is, the sea level rise project. Is anybody interested in being on the email for that? I mean, what-
Tell me about it.
Good, okay.
Yes. It was rising quite high at my house.
Yes, I saw the video.
I was happy to have been gone from that zone,
Moved inland.
Well,
yes.
they're looking at modeling, I believe it's gonna be 5 buildings in each town that are like key pieces of infrastructure, like probably the wastewater treatment plant would be one, because that's, you know, right down on the water. You know, maybe a sewer pump station, you know, maybe the lighthouse. I mean, it's gonna be sort of a variety of different buildings. And looking at when there is sea level rise and then when there's storm surge, just how high does the water go?
Excuse me.
That's huge. And then they're gonna try to decide what kind of mitigation, or they call it adaptation, can be done to protect those buildings.
Yeah, I'd be interested in hearing about it.
But there's some studies that the consultant is giving us that, you know, support. We're actually taking a pretty conservative, conservative view. We're looking at the highest estimated sea level rise, because some of these buildings are gonna be around for a while, and you wanna see, you know, what the worst conditions would be, so you can really protect them.
What was the objective of the study? Is it trying to take samples and then project globally across the coastline, or?
No, they're taking projections that are already pretty much agreed on, like the NOAA has a projection.
No, I mean in terms of impact, or is that what they're trying to do? Are they trying to assess total impact per town kind of thing, or what?
They're looking at the impact of the sea level rise with the storm surge, and they're looking at how is it gonna affect some of the key infrastructure that we have.
So it'd be just selected
Just
spots,
selected
targeted.
spots.
Yeah.
You know, probably, I don't know how much attention they're gonna pay to different residential areas that we have, but it's all the FEMA floodplain that they're working with, so it's not, you know, it's not really anything too far-fetched, I think.
I'd be interested to be on that, on the distribution list for that.
So,
What Steve was asking, oh, I'm sorry.
I'm
The goal of this eventually is to then go to the town and say, this is gonna be horrendous, we need to like put money toward building up a seawall around the sewer treatment plant, or whatever.
Yeah,
something like
it's gonna
that.
be that type of thing, you know, when are these buildings not gonna be operational because they're flooded? I mean, what are some of the impacts gonna be? that
I was
maybe we
really
haven't
getting
thought
to,
about?
if they're only picking 3 or 4 spots, that's sort of an anecdotal approach to it. Are they gonna try to extrapolate out and sort of look at the full effect across the whole coastline?
Oh,
of
yeah,
Scituate, you know.
definitely, yeah, the 3 or 4 spots are for the modeling, they're doing, all sorts of 3D modeling,
Mhm.
to see, how high the water is gonna be.
I think Noah already
And I
has
think
some
it's also
maps that
kind of
show
an
that.
education tool
kind of
to
thing.
to show people, what's gonna happen. Yeah, there is some of this,
Yeah.
that exists already, but this is kind of bringing it locally.
Right.
And see where they can move the lighthouse too, if it has to be moved.
Yeah, right. Well, they have moved lighthouses, actually.
Yeah,
Right.
on the Cape.
Yeah, yep, that one out in Truro, I watched that
Yeah.
being moved.
They moved it up the hill, right? Yeah.
Yeah, they didn't really move it that far, but they kind of,
The hill's going away.
Figure where they would, then they'd have to figure out where they could move it to.
Been to Marconi Beach?
Yeah.
I'd call it
That-
Marconi Beach
historically
out there.
significant, you can't move it for a year.
okay, so Steve and Bob, I'm gonna put on the list.
Yeah, all that's left of
Yeah,
Marconi's
well,
original
so-
No, I'm
broadcast
saw
is
it.
a stanchion.
Yeah, okay.
Everything else is
Okay.
eroded
Is that
away,
right?
yeah.
Don't do anything, take my name
It's been a long
off.
time since I've been down.
Take your name off the list, okay.
So I have a motion made by Bob. Do I have a second?
I
you
second
done?
Bob's motion.
All those
Aye.
in favor?
Aye.
I need one more copy of Jericho Road, or Jericho Lane.
You've got
We're
mine.
adjourned.
Also, if there,
Yep.